To the August 9th regular meeting of the Planning Board. We have a couple members who are running late, so that's why we have the delayed start. And those members include our chair, so I'm going to act as chair until the chair arrives. So we'll start with the first item on the agenda is a roll call. We'll start here on my left.
Darren Finnegan.
Paul Jacques.
Matthew Duval.
Stacy LeBlanc. Tony Ferraro.
Josh Daigle.
And let's see, we have, at present, we have 4 full members and 2 associate members present. I think once we will have 1 regular member who will be absent. So was it you, Paul, last time, or was it Josh? It's Josh's turn?
Oh, okay. I was absent last meeting, so
you were
almost.
And were you full last meeting? So Paul on my left is going to be elevated to a full planning board member this week for the entire meeting, meaning that he will be able to vote and make motions. Our first item on the agenda is a workshop. It's the review of the FB environmental report regarding subsurface wastewater systems in the Lake Auburn watershed. Staff?
Thank you. So FB Environmental updated the results of the findings, essentially looking at what's recommended to include lot size analysis. That is looking at specifically changing rural residential to low country density residential, so 1 acre lots to 3 acre lots. And then in addition to that, they looked at the addition of the septic ordinance that goes from a 36 inches limiting factor down to 12 inches limiting factor. A lot of the analysis is soil analysis that they ran in their model. So again, they used medium intensity soils mapping to simulate the impact of what the proposed ordinance changes will have on land use and the development in the watershed and subsequent lake water quality. So there's an ultimate number that they get to. As we know from the original FB environmental report, the target is 900. That's really where we want to drive to. And as staff, we will continue to ask the question, how do we get to 900 for lake water quality and public water supply? So with that, the new model results of the build-out analysis incorporated in the 2022 ordinance changes compared to the original baseline build-out analysis are provided in tables 3 and 4 and shown in figures 1 through 3. Now, when I'm referencing this, these are, you all have it in your packets. It's in the technical memorandum provided by FB Environmental. So those are the reference documents that I'm referring to. The ordinance changes only impacted the Auburn portion of the watershed, reducing the total buildable area by 955 acres, and the number of projected buildings by 155. They do note, however, these results reflect adjustments made to the build-out assumptions that more accurately apply to the existing ordinances. For example, new development in the agriculture and resource protection zone was removed and accounted for 923 of those acres. So the ordinance, we really had this discussion with the consultant, and over the last 15 years, we really didn't have a lot of development in terms of new homes or new farms in the watershed, so that really limited development for those areas. So we essentially took that out of it. And they projected a buildable area, 74 projected new buildings in that area, so those were taken out. In addition, there were 23 projected new buildings identified within 300 feet buffer. As you guys, planning board is aware of, we pushed that out to 400 feet. So there was additional limitations and restrictions as well. And that was under the original baseline build-out that the ordinance changes conservatively excluded due to limitations using the 4D soil profiles. So that's specific language. The table 4D is specific language in the subsurface wastewater rule. So there's a lot of thick information going on here, but you know, if you have questions as we read through this, certainly ask them. This is just a workshop. We're just kind of talking through it. Accounting for these adjustments, the ordinance changes directly reduce the total buildable area by 27 acres and the number of projected new buildings by 58. So I think in the recommendation, you'll see that I think the pointed thing here is that we need to do both at the same time. To make this effective, we need to change rural res, go from 1 acre to 3 acre, and do the septic changes. Those two items have to happen together to be effective for water quality, in our opinion. This indicates that the expansion of buildable area with the lifting of the septic system siding restrictions changes from 36 to 12 inches to the limiting factor. Again, terminology, just for terminology, limiting factor is where the seasonal high water table is, and that is defined by a licensed site evaluator. It's not done by a model. It's not done using soils mapping. It's done by a licensed site evaluator that has considerable knowledge of soils, and they're looking for essentially either a hard pan or modeling in the soils that indicate where the seasonal high water table is. So that's how that is located on any particular site. So some of these, as Evan indicated in his presentation, some of these are overestimates and some are underestimates. In this particular case, some of the septic systems, there could be more. But the factual information about changing the lot sizes from 1 acre to 3 acre, we really can't change that. Those are the limiting factors based on the acreage in a particular lot, 3 acre minimum, the amount of frontage that you need, which is 325. All those items don't change. And then there's site restrictions to each individual site that we can essentially assume that some of these sites are not developable. So there is a little bit of balance there. Results from the watershed lake model are provided in Table 5, page 7 of the report, and the new model run reflected the 2022 ordinance changes and other adjustments resulting in a predicted total phosphorus load of 937 kgs per year. So that, if we looked at the original numbers, that is less. It's not less by a lot, but it certainly is. It certainly is less. And so business as usual right now, as we installed, we've already done the low impact development technique, so that was incorporated that into the ordinance. So we already did that part. So we went essentially from 957, we implemented the low impact development techniques. Now we're down to 943. And now we implement these two items with the septic system and the lot size changes, and now we're down to 937. So a question that we need to be asking is, well, how do we eliminate the 37? How do we get to 900? So we had a discussion with the water district earlier this week, and I was happy to hear that, and I'm excited about this, that they're updating their watershed-based plan. So the watershed-based plan really identifies any non-point source pollution that's going into the lake presently today. So we're going to identify the high key areas for the next 10 years as we implement best management practices to adjust those, address those non-point source pollution locations. I think that that's probably the best information that I've heard in cooperation with the Water District that we're happy to be working together with to help them identify that during a high rain event, and be out there in the fall and really see where the impacts are. Again, we want to try to get to 900, and I think this is probably our best step forward. In addition to that, the FB environmental report states, and this one might be a little bit more challenging because we don't have our direct pulse on that, but it's the towns outside of our city's boundaries that are still impacting the lake's water quality. And, you know, as we know, there's other communities, Buckfield and Turner, that are impacting the lake's water quality. And there's no specific ordinances in those towns or communities. And Minot is another community as well. So, you know, having those tough conversations, again, I think that the city's more than willing to be at the table with those conversations, working with LawPac, and even working with the city of Lewiston in a conservative effort to try to strengthen those ordinances in those communities as well. So, again, we're thinking. I want to start to think holistically about how we're going to get to 900, and I think we've identified some of that in this report. Just to summarize, a little bit in the model itself, we questioned the model a little bit. The impacts, and it was a little unsure. We went back and forth with the person, and we hope that they're going to present maybe at the council level. The consultant will be there to present to the council some of these more specific items, but the model was run with each individual house lot of an impact between 1 acre and 1.7 acres. And I did put this in the report, are the requirements for new single-family lots based on the LID techniques. It's not more than 0.52 acres. So they ran the model, you know, assuming that there's roads and other items and ditches and things like that for each house lot, that is more than really what's allowed for a new single-family lot under the new LID ordinance. So I think that's worthy to be noted. And again, that might get us. We asked the question, well, would that change the kg per year? And they said it was marginal, but I think it's important to be noted that there's not, we really should be looking at lots of a quarter acre or a half acre impact maximum. As a planning board, if we had the opportunity to approve a subdivision in the watershed, we certainly should be pushing that. And we should be looking at LID techniques and how they're going to treat phosphorus on site. We looked at 3 or 4 individual phosphorus control plans that were recently submitted, and most of the development was between less than a quarter acre to, again, less than a half acre. So they were very small developments. They use mostly infiltration type techniques for low impact development techniques in combination with a buffer. Just today, I went to Central Maine Community College. I met with the dean over there, and we were talking about phosphorus on their site and how we're going to try to get basically the stormwater into the ground and treat it for phosphorus, site by site, as each development occurs on the site. So I think that that's the best way to approach impacts in the watershed, that we look at each of these individually. And again, staff suggests planning board hold a public hearing and provide positive feedback to the city council, recommending both, again, the zone change and lifting the septic system site restrictions from 36 to 12 inches, limiting factor. I think, again, they need to be done together. We inserted the LDCR dimensional standards. I went over those. I'm not going to read them, but a highlight again is 3 acres, 325 feet of road frontage, and all of the suggested language for the disposal fields. And again, the biggest one being 12 inches to the limiting factor. But again, we want to note that in these LID techniques, there's oftentimes, if you look at the in volume 3 in the phosphorus control design manual that's put out by Maine DEP, and again is referenced in our ordinance, there's a soil filter media that treats the phosphorus. We're recommending this again for the septic systems. So if we have a situation where we have 12 inches of suitable soil, we're asking for another 24 inches of that media to be installed there where that septic system is either replaced or new. I think that's important to note. I think we're heading in the right direction. I think it spurs good conversation, and I really think that we're heading in the right direction in addressing a big issue. That's something that the community, the greater Auburn area as a whole has to face together in a concerted effort, and I think that this is a good step forward.
Okay. Thanks. So just so you know, I'm going to continue as chair through this item, and then we'll make the switch at that point. Questions for staff?
So you had talked about the septic systems, and have we come up with any more specific ideas on septic guidelines on such as like point of sale as it being checked? I just wanted to, I think we had talked about it, I just didn't.
Yeah, so all private sewage, I'll just read them off just 'cause, so you know what is in there for language. So the curtain drain piece, that's a design piece, and then all private sewage disposal systems shall be installed on the lot of the dwelling unless the system can be developed outside the watershed or under a special condition. So that's one. The city water district shall have the right to inspect any system within Lake Auburn watershed district during its construction and operation. And then, they have the right to report. And the local plumbing inspector shall furnish a copy of all site investigations reports to the Lake Auburn watershed district, to the city water district. So there's a finding, and then it's not specifically in the ordinance, but there was some language about doing a follow-up on year 2, 4, and 6.
Yeah, so another thing, so as a real estate agent, we come to this town and we look in the files, and a lot of times files do not have septic systems, even, because they're so old. I just feel like that could be a good start of having, going through those properties that are in the watershed and seeing if there's actually even a system design in the file, and start there, because obviously it would be so old that it wouldn't be in the file.
Yeah, we've done that this summer. Evan,
yeah.
at the far right of the table, has gone through the list of all properties that have any type of buildings or structures that we would expect to have a septic system in the Lake Auburn watershed. He's reviewed the city files. We have a scan of everyone that existed in city files. He's reviewed the state database. So we have a scan of any of them that were not in the city files, but were in the state database. And we have identified some that we just don't have a design for, mostly really old homes. And Evan's coming up with a plan on how we could implement an outreach and education program and try to find out more information and get those that are extremely old up to date over time. But I think the like the shoreland zone requirement that you've pointed out, I think, for the sale of homes, having systems inspected at the time of sale, because that's when there's some cash available potentially for a buyer and seller to agree on a replacement if there's something failing. This board or the council this board could recommend adding that to the ordinance, or the council could, but I think that could be a good safeguard.
Yeah, so I have a quick question. So you had talked about some of our partner at towns like Buckfield and Turner. Can you share with me the conversations and the cadence of those conversations as we're moving through this potential change so that we know that they're on board with us? So I'd like to have a little bit more transparency into how we're engaging with those additional towns.
Yeah, that was a question of mine too, just to kind of piggyback on that, was how are we going to enforce those other towns to get on board?
I don't think there's going to be necessarily any enforcement particularly, but I think it's got to be a concerted effort between all the, and everyone that's involved. It's not just, we can't do this in the vacuum as the city of Auburn, obviously. I think we need to have LawPAC involved. We need to have the Water District involved, the city of Lewiston involved, and we need to come together with a concerted effort as all stakeholders. And those communities are obviously stakeholders. I think that's probably our best approach. We can come in and start the conversation and say that this needs to be completed, but I don't think that the city of Auburn should be doing it in a vacuum. I don't think we're going to be as effective if we were all together. So that would be my approach. We haven't gotten any directive from the council or our senior leadership yet to do that, but it was just pointed out in the FB environmental report, the city of Auburn has done what they could, and this is another low-hanging fruit that's out there that we should be talking about. So I bring that up as a finding in the report. So.
And our current line of communication really is we're sharing all of this with the Auburn Water District and the Lake Auburn Watershed Protection Commission. And by sharing with the Protection Commission, we're sharing that information with Lewiston, Turner, Minot, Hebron, and Buckfield, because they all have seats on that board.
Okay.
We're really hoping that organization, LawPAC, and in cooperation with the Auburn Water District and the Lewiston Water District, that they're kind of the lead and we're a supporting role as we move into the upper watershed towns and have those conversations. But the city doesn't have the same authorities that the Auburn Water District and LawPAC have to encourage those towns to do similar things to control phosphorus.
And I guess, Tony, to get back to your original comment, if there's an inspection done at point of sale and it's recommended that replacement, they've got to, essentially get a site evaluator and replace the system. It's important to note that our ordinance says now we have to bring it up to the new standard. So it's not just, these existing systems, if it's an older home, if it was built in the 1900s before subsurface wastewater law was available, they only had to meet the minimum. They didn't necessarily even have to meet today's ordinance. So our ordinance strengthens that to take it to the next level, to bring it up to the 36 horizontal separation. So I think that's important to know. And important to note, there should be some educational, if this ordinance passes, we should have an effort to identify who the realtors are in the area and have a workshop or community conversations about educating the expectations of that with the city of Auburn. So
Yeah. Thank you.
So I have a follow-up question on the question that Ms. LeBlanc asked. So taking another way to think about that problem is we have these other towns and we're going to work with them and we're going to try and get them to change their practices. So let's just say they fail, all that fails. What can Auburn do to further decrease the phosphorus load on the lake? What are the other tools that exist out there?
So one other tool, and Evan mentioned this, and we use China Lake as an example. If we can identify one BMP that has potentially the biggest impact for not BMP, but non-point source pollution. It can be farming, high intensity farming like dairy farming or something like that. So, adding additional language for no agricultural uses could be, or lighting, we use a term with like light agricultural uses, not heavy. Potentially could be a tool. I'm not saying that that's what we're recommending, but that could be a tool, or any of the existing or remaining land is essentially resource protection. Because in the ag zone, there's other available uses. There's many items that could be built in the ag zone already. So there are potentials out there for additional impacts over time. We have we can say that we've had a history of our current zoning really limits additional development in the ag zone, but there is potential. I mean, we permitted the clay farm, for example, where they're extracting clay in the ag zone, and that could be an intensive process. So, there could be further restrictions in the zoning that specifically could address or protect the land.
And so do you know, are there sites that are in very intense agriculture that are actually in the watershed?
So
in the Auburn part of the watershed?
We looked at it. I had Evan take a look at that. There wasn't much. And in the watershed itself, we actually reached out to NRCS. That was part of Evan's work. He's done a lot of good work this summer. And we found very, very small handful, maybe 3 in the whole entire watershed, so there's not a lot. And they had nutrient management plans. NRCS is the Natural Resources Conservation Service. They're the federal agency that oversees farms, and they implement best management practices on the farms. And it seemed that they had some available for those particular farms, so they were addressing those. So we didn't have any other mechanism to pick up any onesie-twosie farms that, small little farms that were permitted outside the watershed, outside the city's boundaries, I should say.
And we do have within the City of Auburn, within the Lake Auburn overlay, a requirement that any new farms provide a farm plan. And that has to be reviewed by the Auburn Water District and found to not create water quality problems. But an outright, a further limitation, especially on animal farms, even though we haven't seen a lot of new animal farms, only one really in recent years within Auburn. That could be an added protection that this is not the place for new animal farms.
I can keep asking questions, but I don't want to. Okay, yeah, Mr. Sear.
First, I apologize for being tardy, and I will put my name on the record since roll call has already been done. Evan Sear. In looking at this, I did have some of the questions that Tony and Stacy had with regard to language that we had discussed earlier but didn't make it into this revision. Further, though, I have a question about enforcement. There is language within the current revision that you've given us that states that the city has the right to go in and inspect these at any time. But there is no language with regard to a mechanism for ensuring that something be done. I think it's important that the city be able to inspect these systems. I would go back to Tony and say my preference would be that there be some sort of point of sale because that makes it into records. That also brings up any failing system to a potential home buyer, so that's sort of all out in the open. But what mechanism is there for enforcement?
And if I can just follow on that briefly, because it's related. one, I recall when we last spoke about this, we had talked about a 5-year period for addressing all the systems within the watershed. And so I would not want to see that die. But as we talk about enforcement, I noticed that FB Environmental noted that there were existing practices and farms that were actually not allowed in our current buffers. There was some ag stuff inside the 50-foot buffer on the tributaries and things like that. How do we handle that sort of enforcement, or are we not sure we agree with them?
If there's a violation of a written standard that already exists, we have the ability to bring an enforcement action. If you have a grandfathered farm that is within that buffer, I'm not sure that we could address that. It would be more of a voluntary educational trying to encourage them to do that. But if there's an expansion of a farm in violation of one of those standards, we have an enforcement mechanism. And I'm wondering, on Evan's comment, are you thinking more of, when you said systems, either stormwater treatment or subsurface wastewater systems, and maybe there will be deed restrictions required when somebody gets a permit and they build a stormwater treatment system that memorializes that stormwater treatment system's location and carries forward through the chain of title in the future. We could have a standard restriction that's applied as part of the issuance of a permit that allows access for inspection. I think that exists in the phosphorus plans, but I don't think it exists in the septic system plans, but we could apply that more broadly if that was a desire.
Okay. Yeah, I think that sort of addresses it. I guess I'm wondering if there needs to be language within the ordinance stating that, stating the obvious, that septic system must meet and pass an inspection.
Yeah,
And the reason I say that is because I understand that you have mechanisms for enforcement, but your mechanisms for enforcement all rely on a standard having been written down. And so we assume that a septic system should pass muster, but this ordinance doesn't say that they have to. So that was really my question about the enforcement. How do you enforce something if it doesn't say that? It says we can inspect it, but it doesn't say we can.
so I've got, when I worked for the engineering firm that I worked for, it was a non-voluntary certification for septic system inspection. So there was a site evaluator certification that the state had, and then there was this voluntary. It wasn't state law at the time that required a septic inspection, but there was a voluntary program. And if one wanted to follow a set of standards, this is what the inspection would look like, and these are people that are certified to do that. I would want to strengthen that language. If that's the direction that we want to go, we should go back to the state list of certified people. I don't think it should be our code enforcement, popping tanks and looking at baffles and tee boxes and things like that, and looking at distribution boxes. I don't think that we're in the business of doing that. Maybe on the install it's okay, but not existing systems. I think we should be going back to this list as staff to look at, okay, was it done by someone that was certified, that had the specific training, and it was done in a very consistent manner. That would be the specific language that as I write these notes, I would put something in there to get that to what's the most current, up-to-date list, and reference that and make it a way that it's constantly, we're going with the latest and greatest people that are certified, and these are the forms that we'd be used to seeing. And again, I think it's part of the education piece for our staff, for the code enforcement, for site evaluators, and for realtors. I think this is a concerted effort among all those that are involved, and we'd have some training around that.
Yeah, and of course, this is a workshop, so I'm not asking for a specific solution right now. What I'm
Just-
saying is that I'd like to see a solution.
Thinking
to that,
about it.
Solution to that presented by the time we get to public hearing, so that we
Okay.
have options.
And
And
it's-
my preference would also be, I
Go ahead.
apologize, my preference would also be, as a planning board member, that we see options from staff with regard to those phosphorus plans and storm runoff plans. I understand that they'll require deed restriction, however, I'm not sure how aware everyone is of the way certain things work. So if it's in our ordinance, we can enforce it, but a deed restriction essentially becomes to enforce that essentially becomes a civil action.
Not
and so-
if it's consistent with the permitting requirement. So if
Okay.
we require it as a permit, I think the restriction being written in the deed just makes the potential buyer aware of it, but the restriction exists as a condition of the issuance of the permit as well. So we can enforce that.
So you can enforce it because of the issuance of the permit?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, excellent. I just want to make sure that we have a mechanism on that end and we're not just relying on a sort of a civil process.
Yeah.
Right, and-
That recording is more to make sure that any potential buyer is aware of that restriction.
Just so I can clarify for myself, what the result of that language would be that if an inspection is made and the system is found to not meet the standard, then Auburn would be able to require that it be upgraded to meet the
Under the
standard.
existing state plumbing code, we can do that, but I think you're suggesting maybe a step beyond that in actually requiring some type of inspection within 5 years after the adoption.
Yep.
Evan has been working on cataloging what we have for information on existing systems so that we could start an outreach process to understand and request that people give us the report from the last time their system was pumped as sort of a baseline. But if you want to see examples of going beyond that and requiring an inspection during that period, we could do that.
So I was going to say, John, it was that inspections in Maine, like you don't necessarily have to have a license to be an inspector. So I feel like that list is pretty important too, having them being certified. I mean, sometimes you can just take a 3-hour class and then you can be a septic inspector. So I feel like that list is pretty important because as in my work, I have failed septics that aren't actually failed. You know what I mean? So having quality, actual people who only do inspections for septics would probably be pretty important too.
Yeah, and I think that there could be a corrective action that doesn't include replacing the whole entire system. I think that
Right,
needs
yeah.
to be
I mean, I deal with it
evaluated.
all day. There's, there'll be obviously little things all the
Yeah.
time, but I'm just, the inspector is that list is pretty important.
So I have a couple more water quality questions, which you may or may not have answers to. Do we have a 2021 value for the lake on phosphorus? The 1147 is 2018 value.
No, we actually asked that question. We don't have that number. We don't have the value.
Okay. Thanks. I mean, it'd be good to know. I know the alum treatment brought it down, and I assume that is not something that we can just continually do.
It's not.
it's-
Yeah, I think you're right. It's
It's
not.
bad
It's
for the
not a
lake.
constant.
Yeah, it's bad for the lake.
Yeah.
Okay. And so for me, I think that brings me back to that monitoring program that we talked about and the need to monitor and tie development to an understanding that actual phosphorus loads are decreasing in the lake and not increasing. So we had talked about that previously, and I just wanted to float that back out there. And one other item that's in the future considerations, well, there are a couple in the future considerations, I thought they were actually pretty useful. Nitrogen hasn't been modeled. And informal conversations I had with somebody who studies the water quality and composition for Lake Auburn said that once the alum went in, they saw a bloom of nitrogen fixating algae within the lake. And so while we're paying attention to phosphorus here, I think nitrogen is also really important for the health of the lake. So I just wanted to throw that out there because they suggest that's the kind of thing they could do. And yeah, you know, the other recommendation they have is just strategizing what else we could do. I mentioned that earlier to get to 900. So, any other thoughts in this workshop? Do y'all feel like you have enough to go on that you can bring something forward?
Yep, I think so. Thank
Okay.
you. I appreciate the conversation. It was a good one.
And with that, I will cede my role as chair to our current chair, Mr. Sear.
First, let me apologize for being late. I would love to give you a wonderful excuse. I don't have one. I understand people's time is important to them, and I want to make sure that I state that I apologize for being late. Also, before we begin, we have another member that entered, so I'd like him to put his name onto the roll call.
I also apologize. My name is Riley Bergeron.
And as we move forward, now that we have a fuller complement of members, that means that we will still have one of our associate members acting as a full member, and tonight that will be Paul. That means that he'll be able to make motions and take action. Our other associate member will still be welcome to ask questions and be part of conversations. So, having said that, our next item is the workshop schedule update for the T4.2B public process. Staff has put these into two items. However, during our pre-meeting, we had discussed that as one item. Does staff want to go directly from item 3 into item 4?
Certainly.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
sounds great.
having said that, I'll let the public know that staff will give us an update on the process and schedule, and then they will move directly into item 4, which is a workshop discussing Area A for T42B. And when we met earlier, staff has a pretty clear direction on where they need to go for the planning board. So we'll hear from staff with regard to how the process has changed, what we will be doing moving forward. Obviously, planning board members can ask questions if they'd like. And because this item was originally described as a public hearing in public notice, and public notice was sent out to members of the public, we have chosen to allow for public comments during this workshop. Generally, public comments are not taken during workshop, but we wanted to honor the fact that many residents received notifications stating that they would be able to talk and present their ideas to the board, so we wanted to make sure that we honor that. So, having said that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The City Council decided at the August 1st meeting that because there were changes recommended by the Planning Board to the T42B text, and the fact that they wanted to incorporate those changes and modify one of them slightly to achieve the goal that they thought the Planning Board was trying to achieve, but to address a concern that came up during the council discussion, that the Planning Board didn't actually have the final text version of the T42B at their previous hearing. So the council chose to send that text back to the Planning Board for an additional public hearing. And then it will also go to the council for a public hearing and a first reading, and then a second reading that is not necessarily a public hearing. So it adds 3 additional meetings to the process. It also ensures that the board and the public have the exact version that the Planning Board and Council have worked on over a long period of time, a number of meetings while they prepare comments at that public hearing. So that's really the change. is that instead of the council looking to adopt a version of T42B this month, they've asked that this come back to, T42B text come back to the planning board on September 13th for a public hearing, and it will go to the city council on September 6th for a first reading and public hearing, and September 19 for a second reading. That does affect, or did affect, the application of T42 or T42B standards to the area that we had sent out the public notice, as you mentioned, the new Auburn area. So we do hope that you have, a workshop tonight anyways, that we get some preliminary feedback from the residents in that area that received the notice, and that'll help us inform an eventual public hearing on the application of T42B to that area. But we'll ask on September 13th that the board consider the final version of T42B and its application to the Court Street area, where you've already considered that in the past.
Any questions from the board about the sort of process that was just presented to us?
So we'd be both adopting the language, we'd be both adopting the language and applying it in the same meeting? It wouldn't
Yes.
have, it wouldn't have to adopt the language, have it pass, and then apply it to an area, they'd both be happening the same.
So more often than not, when there are changes like that, the board and the council are adopting the language and applying it in the same meeting. I know there was a concern that the language would change before adoption, so the board was hesitant to apply it to the Court Street area at a previous the T42 language and T42B language at a previous public hearing. The boards had their chance, I think, to make adjustments. You did that with thorough and thoughtful comments and recommendations to the council. The council's had a chance to consider those. They made one additional slight edit related to the front setback as you move into more suburban areas, and we can go over that at that meeting. So really, I think both boards have had a chance to really dial in that language to achieve the goals of the comp plan and the outcomes desired by that. So yeah, we're asking that you consider a recommendation on adopting the language that you and the council have developed so far and applying it in the same night.
And we've had a lot of meetings about this, more than normal, process? Or is it, this is how many meetings that normally happen?
So it's it's a substantive change, and I think there has been a lot of meetings, but there's been a lot of public input too. There's been more meetings than average, but it's a big land area. There's a lot of people that own property, and I think it's warranted to have a lot of discussion when you're making changes like that. But certainly more hearings, 10 plus meetings, plus community conversations on that topic, the T42 or the T42B zoning district.
Any other questions about the process or? Oh, okay.
So we'll turn it over to Catherine, our city planner, and to talk about the application of a T42, T42B standard within the new Auburn area.
I'm just going to pull up the staff report here. I hope you all can hear me. I'm going to keep my mask on, and if you don't, then I can adjust. But as a reminder, we had brought this, we were going to consider applying T-4.2B to 4 areas. Probably, I imagine that the folks here will have gotten will have received that initial letter. I know many people showed up hoping to speak about the changes as it might apply to where they are. Tonight we will be discussing Area A. We ran out of time that night, so I'm hoping that today we will cover what we were hoping to cover that other night and get the feedback that people were hoping to share. So I'm going to just scroll down to this map area. So first, a quick note, this says T-4.2. It should say T-4.2B, just to avoid any confusion there. So again, this will be a workshop, so usually that doesn't have public comment, but I think we will be allowing public comment today. So the proposal is to consider changing Area A, encompassing 936 approximately acres of urban residential, multifamily suburban, and rural residential area within the new Auburn urban residential areas and along Broad Street to the traditional neighborhood development district as defined in the comprehensive plan. So today what we're going to do is just hold that workshop just to consider how this fits in with a comprehensive plan, how T-4.2B might work specifically in this area as it's applied to this rural residential area, urban residential, and multifamily suburban. So we do recommend that there are a few areas that we will note that would not be included in any kind of developable land. Those are Houston Field, which is 61.5 acres. There's also 53.5 acres at Sherwood Heights School. There's 27.3 acres at Oak Hill Cemetery. And there's 25 acres owned by Androscoggin Land Trust and another 27.5 acres off of Lafayette owned by Androscoggin Land Trust. So that is, I just want to note that one suggestion that we could consider as we talk through this workshop is to mark that those areas be kind of put into a conservation or noted that they cannot be built on. I think that was a concern that we heard a few times. So just a reminder of what the traditional neighborhood development district is that we would be applying to this area. It is characterized by small to medium size buildings with smaller front yards. Closer together, it would allow for a walkable environment with a lot of interaction between like the street and homes. It allows for a more traditional neighborhood development pattern. It is meant to be pedestrian friendly. The setbacks here are less restrictive. So, whereas for this zoning that we've had in place for quite some time, the setbacks have been really what have dictated what can and cannot go in a certain area. And this would essentially make it so it is not based on setbacks, but rather area, allowing up to 16 units per acre. This zoning would also allow for mixed uses within the same area. And I will note that within Area A, that mixed use change is actually not quite so different as it is currently. Multifamily suburban here, which you can see kind of where my mouse is, if you guys can see that. That does allow for multifamily buildings. So it is relatively similar to what is actually already in New Auburn. What that might look like in a neighborhood that is already established is that property owners might have more room to do more with their land. Many homes as they are not conforming. Right now, for example, in urban residential, this whole yellow area, you currently need a 25 foot setback from the yard. Many houses do not have that. So even just that change might allow for more freedom to do what somebody might with their house, make those kind of renovations. And let's see. Oh, thank you. Thanks for that. So areas included in the zone change, again, is just this whole area, the rural residential, urban residential, multifamily, suburban. I'm not going to go that much into the traffic piece today, but I will note that this change would aligns with the transportation plan that the city has laid out. The comprehensive plan requires infill between New Auburn and Broad Street. Creating this higher density will allow for increased infrastructure to support traffic movement, and also the goal really is to make this pedestrian friendly and more of a kind of a friendly neighborhood environment that moves traffic nicely. So our findings are that this change to applying T-4.2B to the New Auburn area is the change that is supported in the comprehensive plan. The higher density will allow for infrastructure or like it's available, this higher density will be supported in this area because of existing infrastructure, sewer, water, power, high-speed internet, that kind of thing. Applying T-4.2B would help to maintain and increase the city's population. That is a goal that is within the comprehensive plan. I will note that the housing crisis, most of us can know anyway that it's become increasingly difficult to find housing that people can afford, who have a job and make like even just median income. So noting that this is a problem that right now the housing will not keep up with the demand, we will really need to have that kind of increased density in Auburn. Area A is one area that we have found that could support it, but that will be up to you all when you discuss and see how it could actually apply to this area. And we also suggest that the 5 parcels be noted that are 5 parcels be noted as not being able to be developed. I think that will help to clear up some ideas of what a change like this might actually look like. And I will say that it is pretty substantial area in this, including Houston Field again, and Sherwood Heights, the cemetery, and the Androscoggin Land Trust land. And I'm set for questions if we want to get going with that.
Yeah, perhaps we could have a brief session of questions from the board, and then we'll open it up for public to either ask questions or provide feedback. So, questions?
So just one, I think when we get final maps of this, it would be great if we could highlight those big parcels that we're excluding. I think that would be really super.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, and this goes back to the discussion we had on this a while ago, and I would assume you all have an answer, but the area going out South Maine, there's a bunch of rural residential. Yep, all that in there is rural residential. That in some cases the city services are actually more proximal to that area than going out Broad Street, but we've elected Broad Street as the place where we want to expand this. Can you just talk me through why that's the choice being made?
So the comprehensive plan effort really looked to this area as a potential sort of infill between the Washington Street corridor and New Auburn. We are doing a water and sewer utility study that includes South Main Street as well as Broad Street. There's still a lot, I think, to be figured out as you get closer to the turnpike. There's a lot to be figured out on what land would be needed for an eventual connection if Rodman Road was to come across Washington. And part of what we're trying to do is do what we can without implementing changes that would then put houses in the way of future transportation development. So I think that discussion has to happen. I just don't think that we're ready to have the discussion about expanding the residential area over towards the turnpike or the higher density residential areas towards the turnpike until there's more information available about what's needed for transportation improvements.
I can add too that we originally had Jonathan Labonte, he's our transportation director now working city staff. He was going to come to this presentation because it's a workshop and we're really working on the items that Eric is talking about. He will present when we have a public hearing on this. So, and I think he'll have some important points and he'll be better at this than I am. But a lot of this development, if we think about good planning and good roads, east-west roads are important. And the layout of that additional density in those locations promotes that east-west road environment that creates a better connectivity, pedestrian movement, things like that. So again, I think it's better left in his lane to talk about that with the board, but I just want to give you kind of a heads up that that is the intent during the public hearing.
I guess to piggyback, I would just ask, so we did workshop this area, and we actually had an incredibly lengthy discussion about this area specific to what Matt just brought up, going down South Main Street rather than going out Broad Street. I know that there's discussion about connectors over to Rodman. So part of the area that's along Broad Street would be affected there, not just sort of the idea of South Main Street. So my ask would be, as a planning board member, that when this does come to us for public hearing, that we get a bit of that story map as to what we've already discussed. I mean, we know what we discussed, we were here, but I think people looking at the reports aren't necessarily going to know what sorts of things have been discussed. And I would ask that if we are being asked not to consider South Main, that there be, you know, clear descriptions and justifications as to why that's happening. If we are being asked to consider Broad Street, that there be strong justifications for that, considering the discussion that the board already had around those two areas. I think that will help us as a board kind of come to a better decision instead of feel like we may be spinning our wheels asking the same questions again because we're looking at a map that's presented that does not necessarily match the outcomes of the workshops that we've had on this already.
Right.
Yeah, Evan, I really appreciate that comment. I agree.
I agree, and as I recall, we actually were interested in what the long-term phased plan was for development this area, and that would include, you know, creating some sketch overlays of where the roads are going to go, and, you know, what we want to do first, what we want to do second, what we want to do third, that sort of thing. That was all part of that discussion that I recall. So hearing about that when we have a public hearing, I think would be great.
And I think, yeah, Jonathan, when he comes back to do that, will definitely be helpful in that discussion. But we'll definitely emphasize that.
We do have a updated story map, and unfortunately, our links are down. If you go on, even in the public, through the public website, you'll see that we have a story map for this specific topic, and unfortunately, the links got broken today with some GIS mishap, and it's going to be hard to replicate. I think we got to start from the beginning, start from scratch, and do it all over. It's an unfortunate story, but that's what happened. Sometimes technology gets the best of us, but we heard what you were saying in that last meeting, and I want to make it clear that we did and try to incorporate that. And we had that built into the story map, and because the links are broken, we can't show it to you, unfortunately. But I think we addressed some of those concerns. I'm not saying we got all of them, but I'm hearing what you guys are saying, and I think we can do a good job during the public hearing.
Will the story map include it's almost 200 acres that you've
Yep.
taken out?
Yeah,
Good.
actually it did in the initial public hearing, and I'm bummed that I can't show it to you today, but it will definitely show that.
And it really starts to make it easier to visualize the sort of green belt that's envisioned around New Auburn within this growth area, so pedestrians can eventually move largely off-road around the southern part of the existing development in New Auburn.
As we think about development in the city, there's a lot of pushback on the watershed, obviously, and this location and its adjacency to, I know there's some areas that don't provide public service, but if we think of overall growth over our comprehensive plan really looks at the next 10 years. Even if the zoning changes, this takes time to, materialize. This is where in the comp plan, in the updates, where they thought that the smartest growth should occur in the city, where it made sense. And again, some of that is to really help support the additional highway off of the Turnpike, and then connectivity back to Washington Spur, that really kind of generates some of that federal funding for transportation projects. So, again, we'll cover it in more detail, but note that that's some of the items that we will cover.
Other questions? Okay, I'm glad to hear Seth say that. I think transportation is going to be a big discussion here. It can already be an issue in the area. Residents will tell you, but specific to the Turnpike. So planning that out well is going to be important. So at this point, again, because we'd like to honor the fact that we did let residents know in public notice that they would be able to speak, and then we changed it to a workshop. We want to honor that residents did receive something saying that they'd be able to speak. So at this point, we're gonna open it up to public comment. I'm gonna ask that folks follow the general regular rules for public comment. I think we can go a little bit looser with regard to content. We'll ask that you please stay in discussing. It is most helpful for us if you are discussing what we have looked at tonight, so that way we can understand what your questions are and what your comments are. Normally we have some pretty strict rules about being on topic. I am going to ask, because there are several folks here, that we utilize the time frame that is normally used by the planning board, which is 5 minutes. I will keep track. I apologize. I don't have a great system. I tend to do this thing to indicate that there's about a minute left. If everyone's spoken, again, this isn't a public hearing. This is a workshop, so we can kind of run a little looser. If there's something that one of the planning board members says, like, I really want to hear more from that person, they had something they were saying, they weren't able to finish, then we might ask folks to come back up. So similar to the way we do public comment for a public hearing, but since it's a workshop, I think we can take a little more liberty. So We will ask that you start by stating your name and address, and that's for public record. And we'll also ask that you give your comments at the podium, and that's because there's a microphone there, and the meetings are recorded, and these recordings become part of the public record as well. So, having said that, anyone who has questions?
I'm short. I need to get this right. I just have a couple comments, a couple questions. My name is Mona Irvin. I live at 177 Cook Street. You mentioned story map. I have no clue what that means. It would be nice to know the terminology. What I do know, though, is that when we received this horrible map in the mail, it would have been nice to have one map on a full page and another map on a full page with streets delineated so we know what you're talking about and what you're trying to do to our neighborhoods, what neighborhoods are involved. This is very confusing. It tells us nothing. It just causes anger and frustration. So whatever a story map is, I don't know, but it would be nice to have a clearly delineated full-page map, A and B. And I just want to figure out something. I heard this lady talk, and you said that the plan for New Auburn is to have a traditional neighborhood pattern. What is a traditional neighborhood pattern? I've lived in my neighborhood for 42 years. I consider the way we are a traditional neighborhood pattern. We are friends, we are neighbors, we walk. There must be at least 50 people that walk up and down my street every day. Mothers with baby carriages, people walking dogs, people just out strolling, joggers. We are a traditional neighborhood. I don't know how you plan to change it and what your definition of traditional neighborhood pattern is. So maybe that information should be given out to the public as well. Somebody mentioned transparency earlier. It would be nice if you were transparent with us and use language and terminology and give us explanations of the words and phrases you're using. We are not the experts in this area, but we are the ones that are going to be impacted by whatever you do. And it would be nice to know what you're doing and to understand what you're doing. I also heard this young lady say that in this New Auburn area, you're planning on 16 units per acre. Did I get that? Did I hear you right?
Up to 16.
Up to 16 units per acre. Okay. What do you mean by that? 16 individual homes, one home per 1 acre, or 1 acre with a 16-unit apartment, or 1 acre with 2 or 3 smaller unit apartments? Again, that's something we need to know.
Ms. Irvin, I've stopped your time. I think you asked a very good question. The answer is no, it's not single-family homes, but I will let staff answer that question, what that means, 16 units per acre.
Is my time stopped?
No, your time, I have paused your time, so that way you have your full time, but that was a question that I think a lot of people are gonna have, so letting staff explain what density means, and if they say 16 units per acre, what does that mean?
Thank you.
So 16 units per acre is definitely a daunting and confusing term, I think. What it means is that within the right conditions, that the zoning would support up to 16 units per acre, meaning, say an apartment with like 16 units, it could be a few duplexes, it could be a few homes, but within the form-based code, it really would just allow for a denser, just a denser layout. And what I mean also by the traditional development pattern, what that means really is building a little bit closer to the road, like to the sidewalks. Just think honestly think like maybe Kennebunkport, like the way that downtown looks with the just closer to the sidewalks, and maybe I think Eric looks like he's pulling out some.
I don't want to be like Kennebunkport. I want to be Auburn.
Your street, we're looking at 4 houses, 3 that are next to yours on the map. Your street is a perfect example of that traditional neighborhood character. The buildings are closer to the street than what our current zoning allows. A new building, if your house burned down, would have to be 25 feet from that front property line. It looks like a lot of those are within 5 or 10 feet. That would be the pattern of development that this code aims to allow for. It does allow for all different types of housing, though. It could be single families, multifamilies, or a mix, condos. You can't generally get to 16 units per acre with single families, so usually there would be a mix of multis as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I apologize. Normally I don't interrupt and stop, but I know that that is going to be a question that's a lot of people were going to have. So
Okay, thank you.
I'll resume your time.
Thank you. Okay, then if we're going to have 16 units per acre, that could potentially be 16 new cars, up to 32 new cars if there are 2 individuals in the family. That is going to increase the traffic substantially in our area, which is already fairly well developed. Our streets are narrow. Thankfully, the city gave us sidewalks, which narrowed our streets. So now, in some areas, in order to get by, I have to walk in the road because cars, trying not to block cars coming up and down the street, park on the sidewalk, which is probably illegal, but they do it all over the place. So you're going to add more cars to increase the opportunity for accidents. We have children going up and down the streets all the time on bikes, running, walking, skateboards, whatever. And if we're going to have 16 units per acre, how many more children are we going to be adding to our community? We already have a teacher shortage. Have you talked to the school board and figured out what's going to be the long-term picture? Where are these kids going to be placed? Are we going to need to put in portable classrooms? Are we going to need to find even more teachers and have a greater teacher shortage? You know, there's a whole host of issues and questions that need to be considered, not just what you're mentioning, but we need to have a clear and present plan that provides for the safety of all of the residents in our communities. And if you're increasing the population density, then every aspect has to be looked at, including the safety of our children, first and foremost, the safety of our elders walking. And there are so many other things that I can't even think of, but need to be examined. We just can't go helter-skelter and throw in more people into a community and expect it to thrive without having problems. And I think every aspect, you need to have a planning session and you just brainstorm who else needs to be brought into this besides the people we've brought in already. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that has questions or comments that they think the board should hear tonight?
Hi, I'm Peter Sear. I live at 121 6th Street, the corner of Rogue and 6th. The biggest question I have, and it keeps coming up at these meetings, is to put houses that are currently out of compliance into a compliant 5 feet setback from the road. I don't know why that has to be the main reason why this is a big push for this rezoning. Again, our neighborhoods are the way they are because we have space. We have green space in our own yards. There are some people who are parking on sidewalks because they don't have enough driveways as it is. So I think we need to talk more about that, and I agree with the woman that just spoke about being more real about how you present this information, because these maps are really hard to interpret, and it would be nice to know where the roads are and how it affects us. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that had questions or comments they feel the board should hear?
Hi, I'm Darielle Simmons. I'm at 172 Cook Street. Hi, Mona. She got a lot of the questions that I had. One of the things that also was not discussed was, and there was a gentleman who came around with a petition for us to sign. And it discussed businesses that were going to be given an opportunity to move into the area potentially. So I haven't heard anybody discuss that yet. I was wondering what exactly those businesses, what that means, and what those look like, and how big they are, and also the tax breaks that are involved with those. Our property taxes just went up to almost $5,000 a year. So I'm trying to figure out how that works into the plan. And also about the whole wildlife impact. I don't know if anybody else has noticed, but there's been a lot of activity right in our neighborhood lately. We had deer like over the past week, so I'm glad that you're going to be keeping the Sherwood Heights sanctuary, but it does concern me about how all of this directly around us, I think within 500 feet, it said, of our homes. So just wondering how the plans are for those.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Tina LaJoy. I live at 117 6th Street in Auburn. I just bought this building, and I bought it because it's zoned for 3 units, and I'm being told that I cannot make the 3-unit without a $50,000 sprinkler system in it. And I just don't understand the whole reasoning behind that. If it's good enough for myself to be living in there now and my current tenant, because my plan was to turn my barn into a little studio for myself and rent out the 2 units. And I'm wondering why that's not grandfathered in. You're looking for housing shortages and all this, and I just think it's ridiculous. I think this development sounds crazy. I'm not impressed. And I'm wondering how high these 16-story units are going to be.
Just to quickly answer that question, it's the limit would be 3 stories, not including an attic story. That would be the highest.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for speaking.
And I would just note that your property, we send notices to every property that's affected by a proposed considered change. Your property is in the area that was zoned to T42 a few years ago, but you are within 500 feet of an area that's currently being considered, and that's why you received that notice.
Yeah, so is the city looking to buy the church in my backyard and put up a big building there for 16 units? I'm like, whose pockets are getting lined?
So that's important to note, and I will continue public discussion, but public comment. That comes up a lot. Folks that come in, this for instance, Ms. LaJoy, the zoning, she would not be rezoned under this proposal.
Correct.
But she received the public notice because she's within 500 feet of the area being rezoned.
Correct.
I don't know how much work it is for staff, but I think it would be incredibly helpful if there was a mechanism to let people know which of those 2 categories they fall into, because we have seen that quite a bit.
Okay. And if I could just note, the state sprinkler requirement for more than 2 units is something that we find equally as frustrating, and we are advocating for some changes to that, but that's beyond the city's control. But we are advocating for changes to that.
Just a question, then who's grandfathered in, and why wouldn't I be? My house is over 200 years old.
If there were 3 units there for the last 200 years, then it would be grandfathered, but adding a unit is a new use under the state building code.
But I'm allowed to make my current living space bigger?
Ms. LaJoy, these are good questions, but it sounds like they're kind of specific to your situation. Could I make sure that someone from staff gets your contact information so they can answer all these questions for
Yes.
you? Okay.
That would be great, thank you.
Is there anyone else that has questions or comments?
My name is Elizabeth Dunn. I live at 530 Court Street, and we're talking about 4.2B. I know that that will at some point be coming back to Court Street. I just want to make sure that the people here from New Auburn understand that this has been a long process, and yes, there have been a lot of meetings, and you have asked for public comment and public hearings, but all the language that you're talking about that is included in 4.2B has had little or nothing to do with our comments. The amendments that have been made and the language, it's really very similar to what we've already been talking about for the last 6 months. So I really, really hope that there could be some more opportunities for these conversations and public comment, public hearings, community conversations to actually hear what the people are saying. But I would also say that if anybody wants to know what 5.2 or 4.2 or 4.2B could really look like, please come to Court Street and look at 555 and see what they're doing under that new construction. If you have any idea what that looks like and what that sounds like every day, right now, and for the next 2 years while they build, and maybe beyond when they get to their phase 2, if you should permit it, which I think you will, please come look at 555 Court Street, because you will see what it will look like very soon in your neighborhood.
Is there anyone else?
Hi. So, we meet
My
again.
fear is that we will start having a discussion of the process. I understand that there are serious concerns with the process, but
No, a little bit.
Mr. Smith, go for
You're
it.
a little bit on track, but
for it.
it's specific to this area.
Excellent, go for it, Mr. Smith.
Great. Yeah, I'm Ryan Smith, 14 Weaver Street, which is new. You knew the first part, not the second part. So my concern actually is with process here. So I'm hearing people say they have no idea what the changes are, and they don't know that businesses are now allowed. I guess I asked to see someone's mailing, but my guess is you guys didn't put on what the changes of use are, and I don't think that's very engaging to the public. Part of form-based code is people in the neighborhood are getting to decide what their neighborhood looks like. And so far, your public process has been hold meetings here and hope people show up. And 3 people from the community show up, and they have no say in what their neighborhood is. And you didn't even tell them what the changed uses would be. So that doesn't seem very thorough to me, and I feel like we should be a little more transparent and also allow for that public input. Because, well, yeah, you're right. On the other hand, the public input we feel like hasn't been adequately addressed, but people in this neighborhood are about to have this big zoning change that's very drastic, and they have no clue what's going to be allowed, and they have no clue the implications behind it, and they've had next to zero input, aside from a mailing that they got to come to this meeting. So I don't think that's very fair, and I think, yeah, part of this process should be a lot more public engagement than what's happening so far. Because if this does go through 2 readings here and 2 readings at City Council, I don't see how we can call that a fair process. Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public comment section here. I do want to address one comment that was just made. Actually, T42 turns New Auburn into the New Auburn that I grew up in. I grew up on Enfield Street, so I did not grow up below the hill. I grew up above the hill, in between Wheeler's and South Main Street store, across
on 6th
across the
Street.
street from what was Gravel's and then became Larry's Lunch. It was my first job was there. We have Poisson Sitco, and that is very much what a mixed-use neighborhood looked like. We had tailors and mechanics. We had accountants and all kinds of little businesses within the neighborhood. So we also had apartment buildings. I think coming out of this, So we did address a couple things, so I think maybe we should address some things with staff that we didn't stop and talk about. Is it possible to start developing a, like an appendix is the wrong word, but a definition sheet, an FAQ that can help answer some of the questions with regard to what does density look like, perhaps including sections of neighborhoods, corners that people would be very familiar with in those neighborhoods, and talk about like, okay, what is the density there? So that way people can get an understanding of what that actually looks like.
Yes, so we actually, that is in the works right now, and I love these ideas of including the specific street corners, and I appreciate that folks reminded me tonight that even though there have been meetings, this is not common terminology, and that's a helpful reminder, I think. So we can certainly do that. And also, I really encourage, like any day at all, folks can call the office, and we can discuss any of these changes outside of this meeting too, where you could have more than 5 minutes. And we really want to hear this input so we can put it into. We can really incorporate it. That's the hope behind all of these meetings.
Okay, yeah, so defining the, I apologize, I just want to finish that one thought.
Yeah, I
so
wanna add
in
to
line
that,
with
yeah.
defining the terms, another thing that was brought up a few times was the concept of the maps that are sent out, and they are quite small. There's a reason why on the planning board when we see a site map we get a huge, just for that site, on it so that we can kind of zoom in. I understand that we have the GIS maps available online, but it's important to note that not everyone either has access or is familiar enough to be able to access those. So thinking about maybe some clearer ways along with definitions to be able to provide those maps to folks so they can kind of see, oh, this is where my house is on this. I can kind of see that and figure that out.
And our goal with those is really to prompt a conversation. We can do a single map that's a full page, but we can't do 24 by 36 maps times
Right,
1,600 mailings. But we'll try to do a full page map, and we really do want to talk to people if they have questions. We speak to a lot of people after these notices go out. We encourage people to call us. We'll sit down, go over the maps. We'll print one of their area, showing where they are in the discussed area, or if they're near the area and they got the notice because of that. Please call the numbers on the notice, and if you want to meet in person and go over it, we're doing that all day long. So.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So I assume there's some like outreach and contact information that is sent to individuals, so they have that so they can reach out to you.
Yes, yeah.
Good.
So right now, my email and my number should be on those things, and if I don't have answers for you, then I will find those answers and relay them to anyone who wants to know.
And just to kind of piggyback on what Evan said about having like a fact sheet, you know what I mean? Maybe kind of like the key points that people are having a really hard time with is the setbacks, having a hard time with the 16 units, having, you know, maybe you can kind of put in, I mean, I don't know, but like what is now and what will be, you know? So I feel like some people have a misconstrued conception of, or don't understand it. Actually, just don't understand it. So maybe some of the key factors, obviously not everything, but how small or large the restaurants would be, you know, things like that, where I just feel like some key factors on the things that we discuss here fairly often.
And can I just add one last thing? A summary. I know I'm pretty sure you all have done this because I think I've heard you in past meetings say the words, but a summary of the planning work you've done around conversations with the school systems, conversations about parking, conversations about traffic, because I don't think people really know what work y'all have done in terms of thinking about this. And some of this is referring to the comp plan update, and some of it is stuff that I'm sure you've done internally. So that would be really helpful.
When you send out your information sheets, please use plain English
Yes, I meant,
Don't use legalese that has nothing to do with what we have as our area of expertise and what you all have as your area of expertise.
so I apologize, Mr. Joy. Part of that, I'll address this one. Part of that we were trying to address with the idea of definitions and how we send things out. Unfortunately, staff is going to be required to include specific information. There are things, a public notice has to include certain things. My assumption is that legal at least has weighed in on how those things should be described, but I think it would be reasonable to ask that staff sort of be able to provide a little more description in there. So I have a question. We talked about, so the school department has come up a few times. It's come up tonight. It's come up in previous workshops on this. The school department is involved with site plan review and special exceptions because they are part of the staff review committee that reviews these things and provides feedback to us first. Are they included when it comes to discussions of zoning as well?
So they are included, or a representative from the school department is included in the plan review group that meets monthly to talk about the items that are going before the planning board. They have been included in discussions around setting the goal that the mayor and council set for 2,000 new homes over a 5-year period. That should generate around 6,000 new residents. That was a goal set by the council, and that was set with input from school, police, fire, public services, and they continue to be involved in that discussion. We are absolutely mindful that new units involve new children, and new children need education. So that is part of the discussion. What we're finding in Auburn, though, over the past 10 years is that older studies used to show like 1 3/4 to 2 1/4 children per new household. What we're really seeing in Auburn, and we're seeing in other communities now, is it's averaging more like 1/3 of a child per household. We're seeing a lot of 1 and 2 bedroom units that don't have children, but less than 1 child per new unit on average. And in Auburn over the last 10 years, comparing new units to school enrollment district by district, it's been about 1/3 of a student per household that's added in the district.
Okay. Any other questions, or? I guess I would leave it, we'll end the workshop, but before we do, I think the members of the community have asked for some certain information, and I think it would be helpful for staff to include whatever mailer it is that you sent out in future packets. Yep. So that way we see exactly what, we can ask you guys for it, but that way it's part of our packet as well, including any of those, any of the information that you provide for residents with regard to the FAQ sheets or definitions and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And
just
if I could just take advantage of, while we have, I took Mona's name down, and there was another resident across the street at 172 Cook. The 4 homes that are side by side in Mona's neighborhood, including hers, those, the lot size, assuming that all 4 of them are single families, I'd have to double check that. That is what 6 units per acre looks like. If there were duplexes in each of those buildings, that would be 12 units per acre, but that's on the face of the earth what that
yeah, and I think, again, that's why I brought that up earlier. I think that would help folks to kind of get a feel for what density looks like.
We've been doing that a lot with individual residents, but we can put together a summary that gets shared more widely.
Yeah.
And I do want to just give a quick answer to the business question, because I know that's one that we discussed in past workshops, but not, I realize that folks here likely haven't heard that before. So for the businesses that might be allowed in this area, so think restaurants with no more than 30 seats. There would be a requirement as of now for the businesses to be owner occupied, attached to that business. So limit it, like no big commercial use. They would need to be about the same size as the homes that would go in here. So also T-4.2B has no age restricted retail, so it would not allow for marijuana cultivation and sale. Short answer, we can provide more though.
All right, thank you. We will move on to item 5, which is the minutes of the July 12th Planning Board. Are there any corrections that people would like to make to the minutes? Did they spell your name correctly this time?
They got all our names correctly.
All right.
Thank you.
I almost asked.
And we had full names all the way through.
All right, excellent. Okay. Seeing no recommended changes, I'd accept a motion to, or I'd seek a motion to accept the minutes.
I move to accept the minutes from the
July 12th.
July 12th meeting of the planning board.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? All right, the meetings have been accepted. Item 6. This is a public hearing regarding Camp 9 LLC zoning exception. Camp 9 LLC is requesting a special exception in the general business zone to expand their current business model into other areas of pet-related services to complement their existing dog grooming and retail business. This is a public hearing, so it will run, for those of you in the audience, it will run differently than the workshop. We will hear a staff report. Once staff is done, we will ask the applicant or agent of the applicant to come forward, provide any information or answer any questions that the planning board had during the staff report. After that, we will open it up to public comment section, public input section within the hearing. I will remind people of the rules for that with regard to 5 minutes and so on and so forth when we get there. When that is done, the board will enter into deliberation and final decision. So having said that, is staff ready to present their report?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Camp K9 LLC is requesting a special exception in the general business zone to expand their current business model into other areas of pet-related services to complement their existing dog grooming and retail business. Camp K9 is located at 314 Center Street, known as parcel ID 271-021. The proposal is pursuant to Chapter 60, Article 4, Division 12 of the General Business District, and Chapter 60, Article 16, Division 3, Special Exception. The zoning exception is requested primarily to allow a doggy daycare as an accessory use. Other services Camp K9 currently offers, which include pet grooming and other items such as that, and selling small retail items. The special exception sought would allow the addition of daycare, training, and taxi services to and from the facility. A retail-like pet store and grooming facility is currently permitted in the zoning district. However, adding a dog daycare to such a business has been brought before the board in the past and warrants input from the public through the planning board public process. The proposed accessory use would be defined as a kennel, meaning any business or establishment other than a veterinary hospital, whether operated separately or in connection with another business or establishment that keeps, boards, or trains dogs or cats or other animals, which may be present in such facilities for profit. So essentially, if there's 3 dogs being kept in the area, you get kicked into the definition under our ordinance. The definition of a kennel then includes businesses that keep and board dogs without a specific amount of existing grooming and retail business services shall conform to all site plan and special exception requirements. The application has listed several precautionary strategies to allow this use. These include separating the dogs by size and utilizing play areas for big dogs only, and another area for small dogs only. The applicant hopes to identify any negative or problematic behaviors before the dogs are admitted. These measures include an initial application and interview process between the dog and staff, and a test initiation period where the newly admitted dog will be exposed to small groups of other dogs. If the nuisance barking occurs lasting over 10 minutes, the owner will be issued a written warning, which will give the owner 7 days to correct the nuisance barking. If the problem persists, or a second warning is issued, then the dog will not be allowed to return to the daycare for 30 days, and the owner must demonstrate what effective correctional actions have taken place. My spot. Staff's, in addition to this, it's not in the text, but it was passed out. There was a waste elimination plan that was submitted late in the conversation. We did have a community conversations with the abutters. As we sent out the notices, we also had last week, during the week after hours, we had a community conversation just to bring in the owner of the dog daycare and to essentially talk about, some of the concerns that neighbors would have. And what came of that was really how you're going to deal with the waste. So the applicant has submitted a waste elimination plan, and I'll just go through it. Sanitation is one of the very most important components to the successful operation of the daycare facility, and they've provided an outline of handling process below. The outside play areas will be cleaned between the rotation cycles of dogs exiting and re-entering the play area. This will not be performed any less than 2 times a day. Our daily plan for the dogs calls for 3 to 4 time rotation cycle, in which the dogs will be out of the building and into the outside play areas. There will be several waste barrels, bags in the outside play areas for the collection and removal of the pet waste. They will also be using what is called a Wisey Wash sanitizer system or similar on a monthly basis or as needed. This sanitizer is applied with a water hose or pressure washer. This is a sprayed application that is designed to sanitize the large outside areas where the dogs will be kept. Ywash.com is the website if anybody would like to look at that. The waste removal from the property will be done once a week at the bare minimum and more frequently if it becomes necessary. We will be obtaining a dumpster service through one of the waste management companies that services the area, and they're still in the process of obtaining that service provider. Essentially, we had in the peer review for the water engineering and our staff, essentially they had no comments to any of those items. And the findings in summary, the proposal is primarily for grooming and retail, and the dog kennel is not is an accessory use. If the existing use is a primary one, then the following findings should be considered. The zoning ordinance contains no specific requirements for retail uses like that are being proposed. So there's other companies that could kind of qualify for this, and I don't know if necessarily, I don't have the history in the city, but like Pet Quarters certainly has animals, and they're mostly considered retail, so they may have not been considered for a kennel. So there is situations around the city where they've essentially allowed pets to remain over the number of 3 that describes it as a kennel. And we're finding that this is essentially something that is allowed, with exceptions. The conditions of the approval, essentially what staff is recommending is the business hours shall be limited from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. The entire perimeter of the outside fence area shall be shielded with a solid fence or fencing accessory cover. During our site visit, it was noted that some areas where there wasn't any, it was just a chain link fence, and there was an opportunity for dogs to come to the fence and see other dogs and see people, and that may create barking. So we're suggesting that he puts privacy fence in all those locations. There shall not be at any one time more than 30 dogs on the premises. This is really based on their license from the state. Then adhere to the plan in place for alleviating any barking nuisances resulting from the doggy daycare. And then adhere to the waste plan to address pet waste generated on the site. So those are the findings from staff.
The only thing that's not in the conditions that was in the staff report with regard to staff comment earlier was the lighting plan. Why was that not included in the conditions?
There wasn't, we asked the applicant for any specific lighting on that. I don't know if the applicant is here. I think we should ask them if they're planning on putting any specific new lighting in. We didn't hear of any, so we did suggest that they have downward facing lighting not to affect the abutters, but there was some existing lighting that they were going to utilize on the site, so I'm going to defer to the applicant on that.
Defer to the applicant as to why it was not included in the staff report as a condition?
Well, I don't know for it would be a condition if they're going to add new lighting. I don't know if they're going to add any new lighting.
Okay. Any other questions from board members for staff?
It says there's going to be no change in impervious surface, so I had a question about that sanitizing spray, where that's going to drain to, what that chemical makeup of that wiki wash is. That might be a concern depending on where it drains off to.
They could provide an MDS data sheet. I don't know anything about the material itself.
But there's no plan for it for there to be a reception bay or a grate put in to catch the rinse off?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Is the site going to be monitoring the noise and barking themselves, or was that?
Yeah, that's a plan that was put in place by the owner. Yep.
If that isn't followed, does the city have any action against that?
If it's a condition in the approval, we certainly have enforcement action and follow-up that we can enforce in this particular case. That's why we put it as a condition of the approval.
Did you find the lighting adequate for what was for the dogs? Were you okay with light? I mean,
we didn't specifically look at the site at night, but again, I would want to defer to the applicant. We requested the information, we didn't receive it, so.
Other questions? At this point, we'd ask the applicant or agent for the applicant to come forward, answer any questions they think the board has raised, or provide any additional information they think is pertinent.
Good evening. Let me introduce myself. My name's Chris Bain. I'm here from Camp K9.
Excellent. Is there any information that you think would be important for the board to have?
With
in our
regards
discussion?
to some of the questions that were just asked with regards to lighting, any lighting changes, I do plan to add lighting that will be directed towards the ground, so they aren't shining into residences that abut the property. There was a question in regards to the Wussy Wash system, which is basically a neutralizer that is able to be sprayed on the ground surfaces and surfaces of fences, siding, doors, whatever you might have that neutralizes anything that is, any bacterias or germs, things like that. There are, with regards to the chain link fence, that area, I have curtains, well, like it's a heavy canvas that gets clipped to the fan, basically the rails of the chain link fence that will basically stop any, you won't be able to see through it at all. So the dogs will be completely contained. There are some areas there where the chain link fence is, we originally designed the fence so that we could see into that area from inside the building. So if there was an issue with a dog or whatever, that we would be able to see from inside out, but we're just going to be able to, at this point, staff that appropriately so that someone's with them all the time. But I really don't have, I think everything's been covered pretty well with the staff report and what I've provided for waste management plans and anything that, we can do to mitigate the noise of the dogs. I do own an abutting property to this one as well. My office is East Coast Mortgage Group, which is at 316 Center Street. I spend 60 hours a week in that building. I don't want to listen to barking dogs all day either. So that's, that is a consideration that I think needs to be looked at. I do have, we do have some kind of similar businesses in the area. The animal hospital next door to us is an abutting property as well. So we do have, we do have some businesses in the area that already do have a significant amount of dog traffic in and out of it, and, including mine, who likes to go out 30 times a day. So she's at my office daily, but that's pretty much it. If anybody's got any questions, I'm more than happy to answer.
Any questions?
I had a question about that spray, the sanitizing spray.
Yep.
So does that get put on at such a volume that it would be draining somewhere to like a sewer?
No, not really. It's really designed to be a surface, like a light surface, and would be absorbed.
Okay.
The area that is there does have a catch basin that's in between 316 Center and 314 Center, where everything kind of drains into there. There's a lot of runoff that does get into that drain.
All right. Thank you very
Anything else?
much.
All right. Thank you.
At this point in the hearing, I would be looking for a motion to open the public input section of the hearing.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We'll give it to Tony.
Oh,
All those in
thank you so
favor?
much.
At this point, we would invite members of the public who wish to speak on this topic to come forward. You can address the board at the podium. Please utilize the microphone because these meetings are recorded. Begin by stating your name and address. Please speak specifically to this topic, and we will give you 5 minutes. Is there anyone that wishes to speak on this topic?
Chairman Sear, members of the Planning Board, thank you for having us this evening. My name is Jim Pross, and I'm an attorney at Skelton Tainter and Abbott today, representing one of the abutters here, Mr. Richard J. Potvin, who owns the property at 336 Center Street, directly next door. We've got some very significant concerns, and I know that there's a limitation here on time, but I'm going to try to run through some of them as quickly as possible for everybody this evening. The first thing I'd like to address is our concerns about the process that's happening here today with this. Under the general business district, it permits normal accessory uses that are compatible with a cohesive and attractive shopping and office area. We posit that this is not compatible with a cohesive and attractive shopping office area. There's nothing like it right in the general vicinity of where this is located, despite staff's conclusion that this would be like other permitted uses in this zone, such as the animal hospital and pet shops, but no kennels. If we look at the permitted uses under section 60-499, sub A20 outlines that animal hospitals and pet shops, but no kennels, is a permitted use. I think that this is clear legislative intent to exclude kennels from the zone as either a special exception or as being considered an accessory use. There is an important 1997 Maine Supreme Judicial Court case, Cumberland Farms v. Town of Scarborough, that is absolutely analogous to this situation, where you've got a definition of a use that contemplates its use either permitted or as an accessory use. That case stands for the precedent that there is sort of this restriction in place and you can't consider it to be an accessory use. And if we look at the staff report on page 1, there is a definition at play here for what a kennel is. And that says it's any business or establishment other than a veterinary hospital, whether operated separately or in connection with another business. So what that's saying is that even if it's an accessory use, it's still a kennel. So we have to look at this as, does the ordinance, either as a special exception or as a permitted use, allow for kennels? Again, the permitted use says animal hospitals and pet shops, but no kennels. I know that you're not going to look at that case tonight, but it is 100% on point with the situation that we have here. There are 21 special exceptions listed in the general business zone, and a kennel is not one of them. I'm a little bit confused by the staff report at page 2 under Roman numeral 3. There it says the proposed exception will be like other permitted uses in this zone. Among them are animal hospitals and pet shops, but no kennels. I don't think that you can get more dissimilar to a permitted use than a permitted use that specifies that use is not permitted, not allowed. So that's just in itself, I think, a little bit self-contradictory. And again, I do believe it represents a legislative intent on the part of the City Council to exclude kennels from the zone. This is highlighted by the fact that kennels are permitted as a special exception under Auburn's broader zoning ordinances, where in the low-density rural residential district as a special exception. And there, what is the requirement to qualify for that special exception? A minimum of a 3-acre lot in that less restrictive zone, in the low density rural residential district. So again, I think that that's an acknowledgement by the City Council that there is something unique about kennels, okay, that warrants them to be treated differently. And if we look at that special exception, we can consider that to be a heightened standard. This lot is not 3 acres. Obviously, it abuts other businesses that are not really consistent in any way with what's going on there. The animal hospital example that the applicant spoke of and which the planning staff has referred to it certainly does involve animals, but does not in any way involve animals being outside where the abutting properties can clearly hear the barking of animals. And I'd like to speak to the noise control mitigation plan and why we feel it's woefully inadequate. It specifically defines and only addresses nuisance barking, which is defined as an individual dog which continues barking continuously for more than 10 minutes. Okay, that is left at the sole judgment, essentially, of employees. I don't know how the city's going to enforce that, but it doesn't give any consideration to the repetitive barking of dogs throughout the day that's going to be going on in less than 10-minute intervals with any one single dog. You know, if you have a dog, I love my dog. You take your dog to the doggy daycare, what happens as soon as they hear a car pull up? They're all barking and they're excited about the dogs coming into the play yard to hang out with them.
I apologize, Mr. Pross, but that will have to be it.
Can I have 2 more minutes, please, Mr. Chair?
That would have to be, generally, that's a vote of the board to allow people to come back after. after everyone has had a chance to speak.
Okay, well, I do have some written comments that perhaps I could submit for the record to staff or to the
Yes,
planning
please
board.
do.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to address the board?
Yes. My name is Tuan. I am here to represent my parents. They are the on property on 37 Newell Avenue. That's abutting right next door to this kennel that's being proposed. Like the attorney said, 5 to 7 minutes per day per dog times by 30. That is a lot of noise all day long. Right now, every time my parents are outside, they are barking. They do have privacy fence. It is blocking, but they can still hear. They're not deaf. The dogs are not deaf, and in and out all day long. My parents' house are less than 10 feet from the fence. So to me, this is ridiculous. If you want a kennel, that should be out in the country somewhere where they can run. There's no abutting houses that are at least, an acre, 3 acres, whatever, around them to be able to reduce the noise. This is also residential, not just a business. Being my parents right next door, it's loud. Right now, they only have a few dogs in there now. But every time my parents are outside, the dogs are barking. How are you going to stop 30 dogs from barking continuously? And I would like to know how that's going to happen. And I would like to know what is going to happen if you allow this kennel to operate, and what's going to be the consequences if that does happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on this?
My name is Holly Miller. I live at 21 Newell Avenue, which is on the other side of the fence of this proposed dog daycare. I apologize in advance. I didn't know what to expect tonight, so I have everything written out. As a business owner myself, I understand all the points and reasons as to why Camp Canine would like to start their business alongside Grooming by Tia, which is the current business that is in the building right now, to incorporate dog daycare at this property. But as the homeowner of the house that borders the property with only a fence between us, I hope that you will take into consideration my perspective that the location of Camp Canine is unsuitable. I understand well what a dog daycare business entails, as I take my own dog to daycare a few days a week due to his anxiety. I have also boarded my dog at a daycare and have used grooming services as well. And I know that the request for this special exemption is to be able to keep the dogs all day for their grooming service, but from what I believe, this is already being done, which has already been said. There's already dogs there all day long, being dropped off, being picked up, etc. My home, specifically my kitchen windows and my son's bedroom, windows are 25 feet from the fence that separates our properties, with a portion of my lawn being in between that fence and my house. With only 25 feet separating my home and the yard that will be used for the dog daycare, I feel as though I will not be able to open my windows. I will not be able to enjoy my home and my yard as I desire due to odor, disease that dogs carry, and excessive noise. I have a great deal of concern regarding waste removal, which was already spoke on, but I typed this up prior, and where waste will be disposed of without the smell of dog feces overwhelming my property. I also have concerns regarding contagious dog carrying diseases and infections that can easily be spread to my dog, myself, or my son through the soil that we share on our properties. Although there are requirements on vaccinations, potential fecal tests, etc., for a dog to attend a dog daycare, it is possible for these breakthrough cases of kennel cough, hookworm, giardia, and more. While I do understand that all dogs attending this dog daycare will need to meet specific vaccination requirements, the risk is not safe for a resident with pets and children like myself to be exposed in their own yard. Although dogs bark occasionally in the neighborhood, mine included, the level of noise that is created by a group of dogs playing outside will make it very hard for my family members who work, third shift especially, to sleep. I don't think it's realistic to expect a group of dogs to be outside throughout the day and not bark or whine while playing to the extent that it wouldn't be disruptive to myself or to my neighbors who are within 25 to 50 feet of the dog's play yard. I myself am a dog lover. I have a dog with separation anxiety, and the behaviors that I've been working with a trainer on to improve these behaviors will also be placed in jeopardy residing 25 feet from the 30 dogs. I can only imagine what he will be going through while he's at home by himself while I'm at work, with hearing these 30 dogs, which are going to be 25 feet from him. I am concerned that I won't be able to leave him in my house, with fear that he will jump through a screened window to get to the dogs, or I will have to kennel him where he will be risked for self-harm. I have not lived in this neighborhood nearly as long as my fellow neighbors, but I do know that throughout my time in this neighborhood, it has been relatively quiet, given that we are right on Center Street. My neighbors and I take pride that we live in a safe and quiet neighborhood, and I feel as though there are much better places in Auburn to conduct a dog daycare business where surrounding individuals will not be negatively impacted like myself and my neighbors will be. I feel that if the planning board approves this special exception for accessory use, that ultimately I and my neighbors will be driven away from our homes. I don't know how much time I have left, but I did take a few notes.
You have 1 minute.
Okay. I did take a few notes based on what was said. I am slightly also concerned about the neutralizer, which along with the dog carrying diseases that I mentioned, there's no drainage system in place that will be going right into my yard. I know that only certain people have visited this property, but there is simply a plastic fence separating my soil from theirs. The lighting, something I did not consider, but it is, they've been in this building for 2 years. There is a large, very bright light that does shine right into my yard, bathroom, kitchen, bedrooms, all hours of the day, it's on all the time. So with that being taken into consideration, it's bright as well and inconvenience. That's all, I guess.
Well, that's great, because I was going to say I apologize.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Richard Potvin. I own a strip mall to the north side of this property. I have about a 270, 300-foot line with this property that's looking for a variance or special acceptance. So this 12,000 square foot building I've owned for about 20 years. It's what I do for a living. I've been in the business since '79. I'm a licensed broker, real estate developer. I also own a couple of malls south of this property. In my building, I have a couple of medical businesses that deal with home health and mental disabilities. I have a mortgage company, a real estate company, a chiropractor. I also have Verizon Wireless at the other end of the property. I am 100% against this because of the noise and the smell. I've read all the documents that have been submitted to the planning board and to you, and the letter that went to the planning board and specifically just addresses what Mr. Bain and Camp Canine plan on doing with one dog. It talks about how we're going to have our staff trained on how to take care of a dog. What are we going to do if a dog barks? But we're talking 30 dogs here, not just one dog. I also noticed in the letter to you that it was mentioned the property's been renovated recently. I didn't see an occupancy permit in any of the plans here. Also, I went to the Q&A last week, and I brought up the fact of the waste, and it was not addressed at the time. There was no plan in place, and right now what was given to you is just a written plan. nobody has talked to a waste removal company. In terms of where everything is going to flow, that property slopes down towards Center Street. Out in front of this property is a catch basin. It goes directly into the stormwater, which dumps into the Androscoggin River, right down by Kentucky Fried Chicken. I'm familiar with it because we've had to tap into it and work with it. So that's where all this is going to go. Secondly, it gives mention to a green buffer. All that was presented to me and to the planning board was a map like this with a crayon scribbling all around the property. It's just weeds and low bushes and some skinny maple trees. But even if it was asked of them to put up a better buffer, it's still not going to solve the noise problem. Let's see. Yeah, also, I didn't know if I mentioned, but the original notification that went out to all the abutters never gave mention there was going to be 30 dogs here. So to put things in perspective, on the south side of the property, there are 3 homes. You've heard from 2 of them. On the west side of the property, there are 6 condos. You could stand on the porch of this property with a garden hose and hit every one of those buildings. That's how close it is. And my property is to the north of it. So, you know, I have long-term leases there, and I know, being in the business, it's going to have an effect on me on, you know, renegotiating my leases, the rents that I'll get, and that's why I am against this right now. And unfortunately, you know, I did the best I could in looking into this, but, you know, I had to engage an attorney because I have a huge investment here, and I wanted to have him make a case on the legal part of all this. So, so that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Collins. I live at 40 Newell Avenue. I'm here on behalf of myself and my brother, Michael Ritchie, that lives next door at 36 Newell Avenue, who asked me to speak for him as well. I know you don't want to hear more of Not in My Backyard, but when I moved here from on the outskirts of Auburn, I expected to lose some of that tranquility with sirens and loud trucks and so forth. But 30 plus dogs, I think, out in a yard barking throughout the day. And I'm sorry if I missed if this was going to be a 7-day-a-week program or just Monday through Friday. But my concern is sitting out on my deck or sitting out by our pool on a quiet day and having to listen to dogs barking all day. I also work from home with my office window facing that area as well. So I'm not sure how that's going to affect my work as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Seeing none.
Mr. Chairman?
Wait, actually there is. If you want to speak, you need to speak now unless we ask you a question.
Could I implore the board to give me just a few more moments to touch on 2 things quickly?
Well, so I will ask members of the board, is there an objection to having Mr. Pross continue speaking? Seeing none. You asked for 2 minutes earlier? Yes?
Can you give me 4 minutes, Mr. Chair? I do represent the butter, and he does have, you know, a right to appeal here. We just want to get a couple of this information and argument here. Just feel it's important for the planning board here, a couple of these points.
I will give you 4 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In the staff report, it talks about precedent, and it indicates, it cites to the 65 Washington Street, which is now closed down, I believe, but as an analogous example, that the planning board should consider as precedent for permitting this type of request for a special exception for a kennel within the general business zone. I think that there is a lot of distinctions that need to be made here between the Rotary location at 65 Washington Street compared to the area we're talking about now, which does abut a neighborhood and professional offices on both sides. Beyond that, I do want to point out that Mr. Cousins in 2020 made the distinction in reviewing the proposal before it was formally adopted in communications with my office by email, saying that there is precedent for a dog daycare being an accessory to a pet store granted at the Rotary in Auburn, which was a location that was separated from any surrounding uses that would be impacted, which is clearly not the case here. And I think that's an acknowledgement from somebody who knows more about Auburn code than anybody else in this building on any given Monday or Tuesday, that this does not fit in with what's going on. 314 does not fit in with what's happening around it. He also pointed in a separate email to the small lot size and close proximity to other uses. So I'm questioning how the staff report changed from what the initial assessment was in March 2020 when the lot size is the same and the uses around this property at 314 haven't changed. Finally and lastly, Mr. Chairman, members of the planning board, a request for a special exception, as far as I read the ordinance, requires site plan review, and that you have to follow site plan review procedures. There are very specific requirements for site plan review, starting with a Mylar plan. You need to have topography, which is all the more relevant, I think, in light of what's been provided regarding this waste management plan. We need to have topography done by a certified surveyor under the requirements of the site plan so that the abutters, the neighbors, and the public can see exactly what the requirements are, from screening that this body might require to plannings for drainage. Utilities are also supposed to be included on the site plan. We think that those are relevant features that need to be better described and outlined for the planning board. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would you like to speak? I would say please make sure you're using the microphone so it could be on the public record.
So some of the concerns that I'm hearing are with the barking and the the waste management that have been brought up thus far. We have not had any more than 1 or 2 dogs at the property since I've owned that building. To say that there is, to be able to compare anything at this point to what has happened at that property is just not, it's not, we've not had any dogs there thus far. With regards to the waste, I am in the process of looking into a dumpster service. I have consulted with a company called, I believe it's Scoop for Paws is what she calls. Carrie Zembis is her name. She does this for a living. She cleans up yards. Her operation is she cleans up the yards and disposes of it within the regular trash, and it goes to the dump. What I'm planning on doing is having this collected daily so that it is not sitting around, and it will be disposed of in a way that is, it eliminates the waste from the property. Like I said in my in the plan, it will be at least once a week. I kind of have to have a little bit of time to see how things are going to go. Again, I am at that property a lot, so I don't want to be, dealing with the outcome or the effects of the waste being there as well. So as I learn more and develop, the plan further, things will improve if it becomes a problem. My goal in any business that I've ever run is to eliminate a problem before it's actually a problem, and that is the best way to run a business and eliminate problems, and that applies here as well. I have been contacted by numerous people that work in and out of abutting properties as far as inquiring when our service is going to be available because it's convenient to them. I have been approached by people in the community wanting to know when it's going to open so that they have the opportunity to bring their dog for the services we offer. I have, I have been approached also by like, dog trainers that want to be able to come in and work for me. So that is something that we want to be able to do too. So to be able to get them in and, really work with the core group of dogs that we have on a regular basis to improve anything that happens with the dogs barking, etc. Things like that we can improve upon while the dogs are there on a regular basis. Like I say, I don't want to hear the dogs barking either. So we're really going to buckle down on that so that it's not a problem. And I guess that's just about it. But I really thank you all for your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Seeing none, I'd seek a motion to close the public input section of the hearing.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? So before we start to deliberate, I will say that Mr. Pross has brought up a point that was painfully evident to me when we began this this specific hearing, and that is that we are being asked to review a special exception. I did not see the packet when we did our pre-meeting, but it's certainly something I would have brought up with staff, and that this has happened in the past. I think recently I can think about there were some self-storage units. There was also an apartment building in which the owner provided a site plan that was a CAD drawing that they had done. And I'm sure it was very accurate, but still did not meet the requirements of a special exception review. And certainly within the purview of the planning board to grant a waiver to an applicant to provide certain things, but we haven't been asked for that at this point. So to me, we were presented something that is on its way, but is not necessarily in and of itself a site plan that we can reasonably review. We heard from neighbors, had we received a site plan map, we would know exactly where the neighbors were, because that plan would show it. I'm also worried, it's not often that we get an actual question of legality with regard to the language of the ordinance itself as well. So I think that's something we need to consider. We can move forward in discussing. I think that having an incomplete site plan application could leave our decision open to, I'll say, further action by any individuals who disagree with the decision that we may make tonight. So that's something the board needs to take into account as well. That's something that we also don't often see. Before I open up to everyone, my preference would actually be to do what we have done in the past in situations like this, which is to table or postpone, but we would table it to either a date certain or to a date upon which a specific action has occurred. I think in this case it would be completion of the site plan and giving the applicant time to address some of the concerns that have been heard, while also presenting a plan that is defensible. In the meantime, I think it would behoove the board, if we choose to go down that route, to also ask staff to seek advice from our own legal counsel with regard to the issue that was raised tonight. Having said that, we can move forward however we want. I just wanted to make sure I put that out there as a chair before we got too far into the weeds.
So I would co-sign everything you just said.
I would like to add that if included in the site plan a more complete site plan be a waste management plan as well.
Is there anything else so the waste management plan, what are some other things?
I think some understanding of the noise ordinance and how that will be assessed, measured, enforced, etc.
So that's something we would be asking staff to present, but not necessarily the applicant, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just parlay off of that. Okay, I understand the noise ordinance around the dogs barking, but I guess I would also want to know how that then compares to the general vicinity of where the location is, right? So I'm not sure about the traffic noise in that area and how that then compares to potentially a barking dog. I have no idea. I'm just putting it out there.
Because we have actual rules about noise and odor, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah. No, I get that. I'm just confirming for.
I would just add that, after everything we've heard tonight, I think the site is very different than where this has been allowed in the past. And if you are going to table it, I'd only do that if you think that there's a good chance that the site could work. And then if we don't think the site could work, which there's been a lot of challenges pointed out, it may be cleaner just not to approve this plan.
Which is also another option.
Yeah.
Generally, in the past, the planning board has always given the applicant that opportunity, and oftentimes when the applicant sees that something probably won't pass, they choose just to not move forward, but that's also an option as well. So at this point, there are three options. We can move forward with discussion because planning board members feel that this should be approved with discussion of conditions for approval and then a final motion to approve. We can move to table with some specific direction to both the applicant and staff, or we could choose to deny. If we choose to deny, I would ask that you do so with specific findings. And if you are, yes?
I was going to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to table to a date uncertain pending the completion of a site plan, clarification of the legality of this in terms of a special accepted use, a permitted use, and that site plan should include a waste management plan.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Tabling is a privileged motion, so there's no discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? It has been tabled. We'll vote of, what is that? 7-1? 6-1. All right. Does staff feel that they have the information they need to be able to go back and work with the applicant?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Is there going to be another hearing after if this goes back into the planning board?
There will be a hearing only if the applicant chooses to provide a full site plan with those things that we asked for.
And if that happens, we will send another notice to abutters so they know when it'll come back to the board.
Item number 7, a public hearing for Row Warehouse, parcel ID number 325-048. Business Real Estate LLC BRE is proposing a warehouse building on their property at 1145 Center Street, parcel ID 325-048. The proposal is pursuant to Chapter 60, Article 4, Division 12, General Business District, and Chapter 60, Article 16, Division 2, Site Plan Review.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, this proposal, first of all, looking at this map here, I just want to note that the map that you see includes this area of, what is this? This area of suburban residential. The actual site plan does not truly include this area, so I want to just make the note on record that that the plan is only to the westerly side of Bob and Mill Brook, which is right kind of where my cursor is right now. So the proposal is for a warehouse which would be occupied by Lamy Wellahan. It is in the general business district, which is intended to include commercial uses serving both the city and the region, together with normal accessory uses compatible with a cohesive and attractive shopping and office area. This lot has an existing building footprint of 1,160 square feet, and the proposed building footprint is 8,459 square feet, which is in line with the zoning requirements for this area. It's all within the permissible building area in terms of lot coverage. It does not cover more than 30% of the lot area. Warehouses are a permitted use within this district. Let's see. It is proposed to have a 40-foot setback. It has an existing 41.5 foot side setback to the west and 79 to the east. The site is limited by the sewer easement that runs alongside Bob and Mill Brook. There will be no wetland impacts, so there is wetland existing on the westerly side here of Bob and Mill Brook. There is actually no wetland impact. The warehouse is limited to this currently paved impervious area right here. Let's see. So first of all, exterior lights. There will be two at they will be existing at the entrances of the building. There are two. I'm going to pull up the site plan actually. Sorry, I haven't pulled that up yet. Okay, so this is where the building is proposed. You can see that there's the wetland area over here, Bob and Mill Brook. There's a sewer easement and a drainage easement. The building will be looped into the existing sewer that's right there, but the water will be supplied from the row building, which is also right on this lot already. So it will not need additional public water. It will be supplied from that property owner. Let's see. So there were a few, the biggest peer review comments that came up were about traffic. So right here on Center Street there's currently a safety project happening, and there are two entrances that could be used to get onto the site. One is from Center Street, one is from Oak Hill Road, which leads into a residential neighborhood. What you see here is the entrance plan for trucks, and by the way, let's see. Trying to see how many trucks. Okay. I'll find that in just a moment. There will be limited truck movement in and out of the site. The entrance plan is they will come in through Center Street. They'll pull up this way, back up to the loading dock, which is just right here. The ordinance says that the loading dock must be 20 feet wide. This one is proposed at 15 feet. There was a traffic model run that shows that this would accommodate the 18-wheeler, that might go here. So this is found that we did find that there would not be a problem with the traffic engineering, from the traffic engineering standpoint of having this slightly reduced loading dock dimensional area. Let's see. To exit, we have this other plan here, so they would be going out to Oak Hill Road. At this point, they can only take a right turn because of the construction happening here. We would suggest that they would turn around if they need to go left, that they follow this right-hand turn around on Center Street, where the school bus turnaround is right now for this area, and direct it out towards Center Street rather than in towards this residential neighborhood here. So our findings in summary, also Water Sewer District says that they have acknowledged that the sewer may need to be sewer service, and it may need to be moved. They've basically acknowledged that it's privately owned, and that and if they do ever have separate services, there must be 2 accounts. And we have had the response that the applicant acknowledges this and is taking that into consideration. So our findings in summary, the proposal meets the requirements of the general business district. It has met the requirements of site plan review. The project does not present any present service conflict, but the applicant will be aware of sewer and services location serving the surrounding property. The proposal falls in the general business district, which is identified in the future land use and comprehensive plan, meaning that it would conform with the future land use plan in this area. It does not contradict it in any way. And the suggested motion that we would make for this project, pending your discussion and considerations, would be to approve the project with the conditions that all vehicles exiting the parcel must take a right turn only from Oak Hill Road onto Center Street. There shall be a mirror placed at the driveway. So actually, let me back up for a second. So there is limited sight distance as you come down Oak Hill Road here, driving out from this driveway. So if you're taking a left turn coming out from the driveway from the warehouse, that is 25 miles per hour. It does not quite meet sight distance coming around this curve. The proposal that we have sought with the traffic engineer is to place a mirror on a post or a tree with staff on site to help ensure that that's done in the right way, in order to improve that blind spot sight distance piece. So there shall be a mirror placed at the driveway entrance off Oak Hill to mitigate the limited sight distance coming from the neighborhood on site with the city staff. And we also are suggesting that the planning board grant an exception for the loading dock here, which is, it says in the ordinance, is required to be 20 feet wide, and it is only 15 feet wide. That is all I have.
questions from the board? I have only one question. There's a condition with regard to turning into Center Street from Oak Hill. We've said that we don't really want traffic taking a right onto Oak Hill. Was there a reason that a left turn only onto Oak Hill was not included?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
So we
Maybe I'm just
discussed
trying to see.
that, we discussed a concern with regard to tractor trailer trucks taking a right on Oak Hill out of the site. There is a condition for going from Oak Hill to Center Street that they only take a right. Is there a reason that staff omitted a condition about only taking a left out of the site if you are exiting via Oak Hill?
There is, I would suggest that if we want to make that condition, that we could make that a condition, but unless either of you.
Yeah, that didn't come up as part of the review, but that could be a way to discourage that from happening. I do know the property owner lives to the right. You know, he may want to be able to leave the site and drive to his house, but no.
Well, I think we could.
No trucks, left
Right.
turn, something
Yeah,
like that would
yes.
work well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a car is fine. Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, at this point, we'd ask the applicant or agent for the applicant to come forward, provide any information they feel is important for the board, or ask any questions they've heard so far.
I think the only thing that I'd like to add is this property was approved for an expansion in 2009, which we provided copies of that plan, and our development is proposed within that parcel that is 2.7 acres at the time that was approved. And staff rightly pointed out that since this project was approved, the James and Susan Pittman property has been owned by the same company that I'm representing tonight, as well as the property out in the back that was once owned by the Water District. So he's increased the size of the property, but since there was an approval on this property, I only represented this 2.7 acres is why I did the application the way I did. We are looking at potentially 1 or 2 tractor trailer loads per month, and we're looking at box trucks making deliveries to the local stores 3 to 4 times a week. So it's going to be a low-intense truck use. We fully know that left turn out is fine with us if you want to put that on as a condition onto Oak Hill, and right turn, we're comfortable with that, and we're comfortable with staff's point about adding a mirror to increase the sight distance. Not quite sure I understand where that's going to go, but we agree. I guess the only other comment I had, I'm not sure I interpret the ordinance to require a loading space for a warehouse, but we've proven that this is going to be a warehouse. We don't need 20-foot wide to back a truck up to a loading dock. Those are typically 10 feet wide. We're using 15, so we have room to walk around the truck. So other than that, we're comfortable with what staff has, and we'll answer any questions the boards might have specifically.
So I do have a question. So I guess what I'm hearing is that when you designed this, you did not believe that you needed the 20-foot loading dock?
No, I think that's for a loading space. And I had a response letter that I sent to the board, to the staff, that typically if you do a convenience store and you have parking spaces at your convenience store, the ordinance will require that you allow for a loading space somewhere for those trucks making delivery to that store. I'm doing a warehouse, and this is a loading dock. And I haven't designed a warehouse with loading docks that have ever been more than 10 or 12 feet wide, because you back as many trucks up to the dock that you typically need. So I didn't think that section of the ordinance was specific to a warehouse. But again, staff made the interpretation. They've asked or asked me to indicate that we can back into the 15 feet we provided. The movements work very, very well, and there's no need for, in my opinion, especially with that, given that we're next to the stream, there's no need to make that pavement 20 feet wide. And, you know, the loading space is 20 feet wide and 25 feet long. We're putting a 69-foot tractor and trailer into this. So we're showing that trailer that's sitting there at the dock is 69 feet long and 8 feet wide and fits into that 15-foot space very nicely. So hopefully I made that clear, but
Yeah, I'm going to ask for additional clarification from staff, so.
okay.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. A loading space, I think, is something you do at stores when you're making deliveries in the yard. And you need to get around the truck to do that stuff. But it's up to new staff interpretation.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much. Seeing none, I'd open it up to the, I'd entertain a motion to open the public comment section of the hearing.
Motion to open public comment.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor? At this point, we'd invite members of the public who wish to speak on this topic to come forward. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak on this topic? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to close the public input section of this hearing.
Make a motion to close the public hearing section.
All right. So deliberation, I guess my only question is for staff, and it's with regard to the loading dock. And the only reason I have a question about it is essentially because it's a new building, and not often, when we do see waivers, they are often asked for, or they are usually only asked for because of some sort of constraint. That is to say, granting a waiver for the project down. There was a project on Minot Avenue that was, 2 feet too close. The parking lot was 2 feet too close to the, it was like 18 inches or something too close to the railroad track, right? Like that sort of thing. And it was, so they asked for a waiver, and then we discussed whether or not that would happen, but they asked because it was something they needed. I guess why? So I want to hear from staff where the 20-foot thing came from.
I can give you my perspective on that. So the site was constrained by the original fill extension that was there on the site, and to allow more fill into the floodplain and towards the stream and the wetlands. We felt that in terms of an environmental project and in terms of impact to the environment, that this is a lesser of two evils. And, from an engineering standpoint, we had them run models on the biggest truck available for a semi-tractor trailer truck. I thought that was imperative to this exception. As we showed in the diagrams, we ran it from a couple different directions, and it really specifically showed that vehicle could fit in those locations. So we thought that was acceptable.
Okay. Other questions? Is there discussion?
And I think looking at these requirements, it says all buildings are required to provide sufficient provisions to eliminate all loading on the street pursuant to normal economic activity. And then it does go on to say more specifically that retail, trade, manufacturing, gets at what Mr. Gatto said about stores, hospital establishments with over 5,000 square feet are required to provide one loading space per 20,000 square feet. Other services. It doesn't specifically require that loading space for a warehouse type use. I think we probably applied that standard incorrectly.
Thank you.
And we do usually see, loading docks that are narrower, but if this was a business that was a retail business or one of those other uses, it looks like we would have to make sure that it has that space off the street. This one clearly does. I think even if we apply that standard, it has room for that alongside the building in the 30-foot wide driveway that we can see on the site plan if it needed to be designated, but I don't think it does. And we do know that it functions properly based on the truck movements.
All right. There's no discussion at this point. I would seek a motion.
I make a motion to approve BRE LLC's construction of a 7,200 square foot warehouse building on their 2.7 plus or minus acre property at 1145 Center Street, PID 325-048 in the general business district, subject to special exception to allow a 5-foot reduction of the loading ramp width to 15 feet. Actually, so, excuse me. I'm going to strike that last line. Is that what we just determined? It was not accurately applied. Is that?
Yeah, it looks like it's only a certain category of uses that applies to, and this, I think, falls into that other land uses. And all we have to do is make sure that they can load off the street, which they clearly can.
So striking that back to the special exception part. So with the conditions that all vehicles exiting the parcel must take a right turn only from Oak Hill Road onto Center Street, and that there be a mirror placed at the driveway entrance off Oak Hill to mitigate the limited sight distance coming from the neighborhood on site with city staff.
Before the motion is entered, would you consider adding a condition that commercial trucks exiting the parcel at the Oak Hill exit, take a left turn only?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a motion with 3 conditions. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None being? All right.
Thank you very much.
At this time, we will move on to item 8, which is public comment. At this time, this is a time where we invite members of the public to come forward and provide comment with regard to planning board business. Our regular rules for public comment apply, that is to say, with regard to the time limit. However, members of the public are free to speak about any topic they feel is pertinent to the planning board. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak? If so, I know this is old hat for you, but please remember to state your name and address.
But I'll do it for the record. My name is Elizabeth Dunn. I live at 530 Court Street. This is the second planning board meeting in a row that I have attended where I've heard mention of community conversations with developers in the planning board regarding a project of sorts. So one was the Hancock Lumber situation with the parking lot, and the expansion that they wanted to make regarding change of zoning in order to allow delivery trucks to be separate from regular customers. I thought that was a great idea, actually. But the community had some concerns, and they were able to work it out with you, and a vote was made, and so be it. This evening I heard of another community conversation with planning board members, communities and staff. I think it was for the dog kennel. I guess my concern is with things like that are, I think, a little less, I'm not even sure the word, destructive, damaging, changing of a neighborhood. Why that happens with certain projects, and yet I'm living across the street from a major construction project. And no one thought 8 months ago, 10 months ago, I don't know how long ago, that maybe that developer should have sat down with the people that lived immediately around and had a conversation about what might fit there. I'm really concerned, and I can't do anything about it now. But I think we should all be on record that if we can have conversations about little projects, we should be able to have them for really big ones. It affects a lot of us, and not just the people that live immediately around, but all the people going back and forth, the traffic, the construction, the one-lane road a couple weeks ago. Nobody thought to deter the traffic.
during that time, it would have been a really smart move to detour traffic around Court Street when they were doing one-lane road construction. Anyway, those are my comments. I don't understand. Process doesn't seem to work for me. Doesn't make sense. I think we all could agree that there are ways we could make this amenable to all of us in the city, not just little projects, but the big ones too. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? All right, seeing none, we will move on to our next item. Item 8, miscellaneous. So, although before we move on, I guess this works in miscellaneous. The planning board members aren't privy to why we have those or when we have those. What is the metric for determining that on the staff's part?
So we suggest them as an option, quite often with projects where we either don't know what to anticipate for a public response or where we think there are concerns that might be addressed ahead of the planning board's meeting. Quite often the applicants will take us up on that. They don't have to, but I think we try to encourage them, explaining that it really bodes well to show that they have engaged the neighbors, that they've tried to understand concerns and address them before they submit for the planning board.
So am I hearing that's not staff hosting these meetings then? What it is, staff has spoken to an applicant and said, we really think that this is in your best interest to do this, and then the applicant is choosing to have these meetings?
Yep, generally, yep. And there are certain projects where the council had asked for the Hammond Lumber one, so they suggested to the applicant that they needed to do that before the council would consider their zone change. I believe that one of the projects coming up, the Auburn Suburban Little League ball fields, I think they're choosing to do that. We will participate, we'll provide information. We want to understand the issues to help prep for the planning board review. But our process doesn't require an applicant to do that.
Okay. So. You need to speak to your city councilor and create a ordinance that makes it a requirement. So upcoming items for September, public hearing. Consider updating septic ordinance in conjunction with changing RR to LCDR in the Lake Auburn watershed. We spoke about that a little bit tonight. So is there anything that you guys wanted to add about that?
We think that'll come up in September. We are looking at the agenda as it gets built, and we may talk to you about having a second meeting if it's too full, and that would likely be one of the items that would get moved to its own meeting. Okay. We do expect to address that in September.
Or October.
Okay. I think we heard about 2 and 3, the public hearing considering 4.2B and the possibility of the Court Street area. Is there anything that staff wanted to add with regard to that? Or just that it's coming up?
Just that it's coming up.
Public hearing, Suburban Little League. Sounds like we're going to have some feedback from a community meeting possibly as well.
Yeah, I don't think that we don't have an application in time for the September meeting, so I think that'll come before the board in October, but that gives us ample time for them to connect directly with their neighbors in a neighborhood meeting.
Okay.
Which I believe they would like to do.
And there is a petition to rezone 58 acres of general business to T42 within the existing gravel pit, which includes a portion of parcel ID 289-001 and 289-002. And unless someone's got their head in the sand, get it, because it's a gravel pit. Yeah, no.
It's the Genren
that's the Genren property on Graceland. So, can you tell the board? So there's a petition to rezone. There's three basic ways that zoning amendments happen. They can be planning board initiated, council initiated, so that everyone on the board understands. For instance, an example of a council initiated zoning change would be what we've been looking at with regard to like T42 and T42B and the different areas. But this one is a citizen initiated, yes?
Yes, with 25 or more signatures as required by the ordinance. We're getting some advice on how that interacts with a citizen initiative petition to repeal the zoning that's currently in place there.
Right.
But we do think that we'll have an obligation to bring that before you in a defined timeline, likely in September.
And so what's the timeline? Does this have to come to us before the citizens initiative is dealt with by council?
No.
Because we only have 45 days to look at these.
Yeah, we're looking for some advice on how those two interact, because we don't know if the council will repeal that decision or send it to referendum, or we just don't have that answer yet. So we're looking for some advice on that. We wanted to give you a heads up that we received a petition that is asking for that to be zoned to T42. And the owner of the property is doing that because he's heard concerns about commercial uses, and he doesn't plan on constructing any commercial uses. So he was thinking that was a way that might be more palatable to allow him to build housing. And the petition only applies to the front 1,000 feet of the parcel along Gracelawn Road. So parallel to Gracelawn Road, 1,000 feet. It does not include the entirety of the area that was approved as general business outside of the watershed.
Okay. And so planning board knows LawPac has some information that ought to be available as well with regard to areas that are closer to the lake and whether or not it looks like they drain into the lake or not. So we'll end up having a lot of information, I think, on that. It'll be a big one. All right. Next one, consider transitioning to digital planning board packets. I know staff was talking about it. It would not mean that we don't get our paper packet.
No, it wouldn't. So, what we are proposing, and like if anyone has other ideas, we can definitely entertain them. But what we're proposing is that instead of delivering the packets like the week before the meeting to your homes, we're considering having the shared planning board drive where you will have access to all of the normal planning board items as they would like appear on the website, or how we see it. You can see us pulling them up here. And then at the meeting, you would receive the hard copies of the plans that were submitted by the applicants.
So then staff reports would be just the digital?
Yes.
So the only thing printed would be the materials from the applicant?
We can also print it out for you and just provide it at the meeting as well. That would be fine.
Yeah, that would be my only concern. We talked about this, I don't know, maybe 7-ish years ago, maybe longer, about doing this. And at the time, there were a few members of the board that were just like, no, absolutely paper. And so we just kind of decided, well, if we're going to do paper for one, we'll just do paper for everyone. We had discussed the idea of, and I don't know if we had discussed it here or if it was in a meeting with staff where the full board wasn't there, the idea that it might be would it be possible for us to get surplus tablets from the school department. The city and the school department have been doing a really good job playing along, so that way we can have those here if we were going to utilize digital packets. And so I have no problem utilizing a digital packet, but to Matt's point, sure, I'll use it at home. I'll access it at home and I'll make my notes then. But I'm going to want, if I'm getting it in paper and I don't have something provided to me here to look at it, I want everything in paper as well.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, I spend my whole day digital. I personally like paper. I think it just helps organize a little bit, but I'll go with a broader group.
Is that more so for the larger plans? Would a hybrid work for some people if you got all the larger plans in paper, but the 8.5 by 11 was digital? I'm just curious.
I love paper. I like that, but I just don't understand. So if we have it all digital and then you're just going to give us all paper at the meeting?
That could be an idea, yeah. If that's, the other thing is that if you wanted the paper application, we get the initial application from applicants like a month beforehand, and that we could just mail those out with the idea that there might be revisions that we'll talk through, and those will go up on the site, but that could be another option.
So what is the purpose of doing that?
Yeah,
I was just gonna say, me too. What's the candid question is the candid question?
Because if we're going to ask for everything to be printed off.
It saves time, and I think it would just save a chunk of time, and
Is the time delivering the packages?
delivery time, printing everything out. If we need to change something, we need to like reprint everything out again, and it just buys us, I think, a little bit more time and room for adding those like last minute things like the waste elimination plan that we saw today.
Well, I'm more than happy to pick up my packet to help you from a kind of travel perspective.
Did you want to deliver mine?
I would.
I'll put out there that the thing that I like in paper are the large plans. The rest of it, digital is totally fine. It's during that one thing that I wouldn't want is during the pandemic, the PDFs were all merged so that you had the large documents in, and so then the zooming between the different paper sizes within the PDF was really problematic. So if you do it that way, keep the maps separate from the text, because when you merge them together, it's really hard to view. But otherwise, I'm fine digital.
Nope. So I'm hearing we will still do paper packets. And
that seems to be the consensus. I mean, I understand moving to digital. I actually have no issue with it.
It's hard because I just write notes on it. It's like a whole
Let's continue with paper, but let's start to use the SharePoint. You guys will see this stuff a little bit earlier, but know that there will still be changes leading up to the meeting as the applicant addresses it, and over time, maybe we'll love the digital.
Well, and I'll say this too, like if there's an ever-evolving piece of information, then just send us an email and say, okay, this seems to be evolving, we can't nail it down. Let's just go to the SharePoint and then manage it from that perspective, like so they know how to keep printing. Like I think we're pretty flexible.
Oh yeah.
So what we can do is there's a planning board SharePoint folder, and we can have like a different folder for each of the projects that we have, maybe like have the understanding up to like a certain date that like in general this stuff is evolving, but and maybe just like, what if we sent an email when everything's totally final? Would that be okay? But that way you can have a sneak peek, look at it, get your thoughts, ask questions, like all leading up to the meeting.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Excellent. All right.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Excellent. Is there a second?